This is Youjo Senki, The Saga of Tanya the Evil, Volume 2 plus Ultra, Chapter 4, The Devil off the Coast of Norden. We begin with a quote. "We weren't given torpedoes, but eels. Maybe load your tubes with development personnel instead." Quotation from Imperial Navy Internal Submarine Manual, The Torpedo Crisis. December 10th, Unified Year 1924 AD, Entente Alliance, Arnelson Port. Upon hearing the news that the city of Oz had fallen, coupled with the Imperial Army's advance on the interior, everyone of that generation understood that this was the end for the Entente Alliance leadership. Some lifted a glass to toast the Imperial Army's victory. Others downed bitter drinks in anticipation of that victory. Everyone saw it as the end of the Entente Alliance, the end of days for their nation. But they cried out to encourage the ones directly involved, who were beginning to break in the face of their fatherland's looming fate. It wasn't over yet. The Empire's victory was not certain. Only the government had given up. The civilians, the people, were not defeated. So, are we ready to sow our seed of rebellion? The Republic agreed, and the Commonwealth also agreed to take someone as a diplomat. Resistance could continue outside of the fatherland. Yes, the war against the Empire would carry on beyond their borders. Well then, shall we jointly sign over our authority? In that case, I think the recipient should be Foreign Affairs Counselor Abensal. No, I think we should send the youngest, Culture Counselor Corsor, as our ambassador. Oh, but I disagree. You are the better man for the job, Counselor Abensal. Someone had to survive and continue the fight, to declare that we are still here. And it was the soldiers who would act based on the counselor's intentions. The reality was obvious, but the army did what the government demanded of them. Everyone would do all that they could for their country, which was how it should be in a unified nation. If there was one thing that was often forgotten in the grander picture, it was that those soldiers who are asked to give their all and are sacrificed by the politicians in the name of the fatherland have families and happy households to tend to. And so that day before deploying, the Entente Alliance mages had only a short time to say their farewells. Good luck. I'm sorry, Colonel Sue quietly apologized as he embraced his tearful wife. She would evacuate to another country to avoid the fighting. The fact that they were a family who could choose that option was Sue's only consolation as head of the household. He should probably have been happy that he could have his family go to the United States of America and live out their days in exile. Still, the way things had turned out meant he had no choice but to send them away. Probably the only thing every Entente Alliance soldier can do is hug their family and exchange hopes for the safety and well-being of their people and of their kinsmen and of their children. Our fatherland is no longer safe. Dad? Mary, look after your mother and take care of yourself. You can't come with us? I'm sorry. I have work again. He forced himself to remember that he was still very lucky. He had the connections to at least get his family to safety. Given the congested maritime traffic and issues with controlling the sea routes, it wasn't an option open to many people. He did feel a bit guilty, but he could protect his family. But if he could protect his family, he had no regrets. Of course, it wasn't what Sue truly wanted. He would have much preferred to spend peaceful days in the warm embrace of his family. If he had known this was going to happen, he would have gone home more often. Why didn't I appreciate what a blessing this was to have my home so close at hand? I should have spoken to my daughter more. There are so many things I still want to tell my wife, so many regrets. It was stupid of me to believe that our lives would go unchanged forever. It was a feeling even he couldn't explain. But when he loosened the arms he had unconsciously wrapped around his wife, as if sweeping away some awkwardness, he managed to put on a smile as he crouched down to his daughter's eye level. "Anson, I may not have been a very good parent, a horrible father, but I hope someday you'll think of me as a father you can be proud of." "It's okay, you're my dad." "Oh, but you should have." She was such a sweet girl. He had hugged her in spite of himself. He wanted to grin at her ticklishness. "You're right. I really should be good and shave." "Get it together, Dad." "Yeah, you're right. I've got to get it together." The most Sue could do as a father was laugh like that with a wry smile. The moment where his daughter scolded him for not shaving often enough, that was normal life. The essence of his precious everyday world. "Well, this is no good. I can't have you worrying about me. I'd rather remember you with a smile. Please stay safe, Father." The fact that his... Never mind. "Please stay safe." The fact that his wife bravely wished him well. Oh, so that was his wife speaking, not his daughter. My mistake. Even after she had broken into tears, pained his heart. He wanted to board the ship with them, to live out their lives together. But he was a soldier bound by duty. Duty. Ugh. Annoying, noble duty. "O fatherland, I give myself up to thee. So God, please, bless my home, the country my family loves, and keep it safe." "Dad, it's a little early, but Merry Christmas." As Sue steeped in sentiment, his daughter pointed at a large case before she boarded the ship with her mother, telling him to take good care of it. Momentary relief filled his heart as he watched them go, as well as the sadness at their parting that could very well be final. But if there was one thing he didn't want to do, it was regret that moment. There was nothing unluckier than tears in a send-off. He forced himself to smile, and then suddenly realized the case was gone. He was confused until he noticed an old acquaintance holding it out to him with an easygoing look on his face. "Sue, this is a Christmas present from your daughter. Take it with you and guard it well." The bizarre remark came from Counselor Kazor, who was present to see the evacuees off. Wondering why the counselor would know about his daughter's present, Sue grabbed the case only to be puzzled by its unexpected weight. These weren't cookies or a wool sweater inside. It was something much heavier. "Counselor Kazor, what is this, if I may ask?" "Go ahead and open it." "That's an SMG submachine gun from AS Weapons in the Waldstadt Confederacy, durable with a body like an LMG. That's light machine gun. At the counselor's suggestion, Sue moved to the shade and opened the case. What greeted him was a brand new submachine gun, a fairly costly model that would work well in conjunction with his orb. Clips, magic bullets, and a set of maintenance tools. It came with everything. How did she get a hold of something like this? He admired the solid yet light build as his examination continued. It accepted the same caliber as his rifle and had a shorter range, but it was far easier to handle in a close quarters fight. It was a good choice for facing anyone who snuck up on him. Additionally, the limited range meant a comparatively lower risk of accidentally shooting an ally, so that was a big plus. That's why he had to wonder, how in the world did my daughter get this? It's a personal gift from a lousy Commonwealth fellow. For a country with such horrible food, they sent us a good man, wouldn't you say? Sorry? Apparently, he saw your daughter crying in the park. He put your initials on it. Oh, the AS is for my name, Anson Sue? He was sure the engraved letters were the factory's logo. The level of effort made him smile. I don't know if my daughter is sinful or if heaven simply loves her, but she sure wooed that intelligence agent. Now and again, those Albion chaps actually can do something nice. Surely it's the initials for Arnold and Smith Weapons Corporation. Or Company. No. Apparently that's stamped on the underside. Counselor Kazor looked somehow amused as he explained. That vexing Commonwealth gent was probably moved by your daughter's tears and gave her a discount. Apparently, she paid the special price of £100. Or pounce. Pounts. Pounce. Either that's a different currency by way of the alternate timeline, or it's a typo. I honestly couldn't say. That's surprisingly cheap, Colonel. Thanks for giving your dad such a great present, sweetie. He wanted to give her a kiss if he could, but she was already gone. So this is what the strength of 100 men feels like. I'm proud to have such a happy family. I'm sorry, Colonel. I'm afraid we're going to ask you. We are going to ask too much of you. You arranged the ship for me. For my part, I am prepared to protect my family's home with my own 2 hands, with my life as well. We're counting on you. One man bowed, and the other smiled in receipt of the gesture. They didn't need to say anything more. December 11th, Unified Year, 1924 AD. Empire. Rhine Hotel. Dining room. For Tanya, it's a wonderful autumn lunch. The appetizer had been a delightful pâté of seasonal fish. The skillfully prepared dish used fish so fresh it seemed almost a waste to make them into a paste. No praise would be enough. It was simply sublime. The potato soup was legendary. She was used to eating potatoes, so it felt strange to enjoy them so much. With that said, it wasn't a bad thing. Battlefield rations could hardly compare when it came to the level of care devoted to their creation, and as such, the dish was an embodiment of humanity's delightful creativity. She has heard the main course, which hasn't arrived yet, is whitefish. The waiter explained the dish so proudly she had high expectations. If the hotel's waiter says it's that good, not only should the quality of the ingredients be high, but she is certain it will demonstrate the chef's skills too. And the fact that her dining mates are also happily expectant makes the meal all the more fun. With her are members of the Reservists Association and notable figures from the region. To think that she gets to network with them, she can only marvel at her good fortune. As they have an understanding of soldierly habits, the gift from the troops up north, Korshenkorva, is going over well. Okay, editor's note. Korshenkorva, an alcoholic drink. Sounds Russian. Alright. I can see why this stuff is notorious for increasing your chances of becoming an alcoholic. What is it, like a vodka? It sounds like vodka, but not. Though they are old soldiers, they are mainly just men well known around town who are getting on in their years. They are probably just surprised by the curious flavor, and if they're happy to have an interesting story of receiving such a gift from a child soldier of my age, all the better. With her scheme going according to plan, conversation flows naturally, and Tanya is able to enjoy herself quite a bit. Even if she can't drink with them, it was worth the trouble of confiscating a case of the stuff for private use at parties. Who the fuck did she steal that from? She is most satisfied. As she's thinking how happy she is about the results of her labor, she's looking forward to enjoying the sautéed whitefish when the waiter brings not the highly anticipated main dish, but the receiver of an ominous-looking black telephone. Miss von Degrichaff. He deliberately asks her if she will accept the call. She's on her way back to Central, having lunch with these local reservists and celebrities as an excuse to pass through a resort town. Who gets a wartime phone call in that setting? My best day off has turned into my worst in an instant. I'm also now dubious that I'll really get to spend Christmas on leave as I was promised. She takes the respectfully proffered receiver with reluctance. If it weren't her duty, she would want to run away. This has to be just how Churchill felt getting woken up by the news that his capital ships had been sunk. That's Winston Churchill of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, also referenced as the Commonwealth in this story. Would someone make me a hellish cup of black coffee, please? This is Major General von Rudersdorf of the General Staff. Major Tanya von Degrichow? Yes, sir, this is she. He knew before he even spoke. It was obviously a call from a military person. No statement of purpose or seasonal greeting. Not to mention, General von Rudersdorf is still at this moment on the forwardmost line fighting the Entente alliance. The implications are the opposite of this gorgeous luncheon. The telephone call will be an invitation back to the wretched front lines. She is sure of it. I want to go home right now. How could I have been so dense to come to this meeting where everyone would know exactly where I am? A notice from the General Staff Office. Assemble Major von Degrichow and her unit at once. Report in as soon as this is done. Understood, sir. We shall proceed to the nearest garrison at once, and I will report in as soon as we are all gathered. It's an impressively impossible to misunderstand order to mobilize. She has already responded to a pile of unreasonable General von Rudersdorf orders, but it seems he is going to work her some more. If this was going to happen, she should have blocked the radios and taken her time going back under the pretense of training. Well, there's no use crying over whatever. I believe the proper turn of phrase is there's no use crying over spilled milk, but whatever, translator fucked that one up. Well, there's no use crying over spilled milk. She replaces the receiver and slips the waiter a generous tip. It's not his fault that the news is awful. She doesn't like it, but services must be compensated. Oh, good news, Major von Degrichow? But apparently, people give big tips when news is favorable. I can't help but think of that as emotional, illogical behavior, so I don't do that. But it seems the amount I gave was a signal to these local names, who hadn't heard that the message was something fortunate. I'm probably supposed to smile at these gentlemen and politely reply, but I'm not sure that I can manage it. In the end, her face wears an unrefined frown as she shakes her head. No, sir. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be very good news at all. Oh, that's... The man with the expression of utter compassion on his face is truly a good person. Well, they have the goodwill of men who don't have to go to war. To someone being sent on the assault, it's complicated, but it is what it is. Polite manners are one of the most basic tools for keeping mistakes to a minimum. As such, it is only a matter of course that I follow these rules. At their core, human beings are political animals, but at the same time, they are social ones as well. My apologies, but I have orders. I'll have to leave early. I wish you well, Major. Can I say for sure that none of them are feeling lucky it's not them? Tanya decides it's a groundless suspicion and puts on a polite smile as she swallows her bitter thoughts and stands. Thank you. I hope you'll all forgive my rudeness. Please excuse me. With those parting words and a bow, she takes her overcoat from the waiter and pays her bill. She's dressed formally, in uniform. Her overcoat, having been designed for practical use, is quite substantial. Somehow, it bothers me, but the army can be irrational in the strangest ways. Of course, I also have to wonder about people who wear trench coats as fashion. Implying trench coats aren't the most fashionable thing in history, my god. Sorry, Tanya, you're wrong on this one. That shit's beautiful. While she was picking up her coat, a military vehicle had been sent over. A thoughtful waiter must have alerted the orderly in the waiting room. A car with her subordinate at the wheel is already standing by. The efficient arrangements make her feel a little better. Humans have to live with a positive outlook, after all. And so she finds the situation genuinely wonderful. She was right not to be stingy with the tips for the waiters. It's also nice that they open the door so courteously. She quickly gets into the car, and it pulls out. "Corporal, back to the barracks. Sorry, but if you can step on it." "Yes, ma'am." The corporal takes off, and amid the slight jolts along the way, she decides to share her misfortune. "I don't enjoy suffering alone. However, I don't mind making others suffer alone, either." Without even giving herself time to sink back into her seat, she boots up her computation orb. She connects to the garrison and calls the officer of the week. The fact that he answers on the second alert means he passes. "What can I do for you, Major?" "Well, I'm sorry to say it, but it's bad news. Rather than beat around the bush, I should just get to the point. Leave's been cut short. Issue mobilization orders immediately. All hands should stand assembled as of right now." "Yes, ma'am. Mobilization orders. Understood. I'll call everyone back from their half-day leave." "Well, my rest in this resort town is certainly over sooner than I'd planned." Then Tanya has a vexing thought. The possibility that even before she applied for leave, General von Rudersdorf had been kind enough to hold her unit up near a naval base for a few days as nominal time off. It's totally possible. If, during a large-scale operation on the northern lines, they were transferring a unit that could keep itself safe from espionage, the General Staff certainly might have the 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion withdraw. It's actually quite practical from a strategic perspective. "Hurry. It's orders from the General Staff." "Understood, ma'am." The fact that they singled her out to give the orders makes her think the General Staff wants to hide something. Yes, upon closer consideration, there is something very unnatural about this. Why now, of all times? Is General von Rudersdorf from operations personally in Norden on the pretext of an inspection? Temporary camp of the Imperial Army's 203rd Mage Battalion. Telegrams from the Imperial Navy Northern Sea Fleet Command. Read it. From the fleet? That's the doubt in my mind. Tanya shares the question behind the puzzled looks of the 203rd Mage Battalion's officers. Why did the fleet's command go to the trouble of sending us a telegram of all things? The fact that they aren't going through the regional army must mean this is what the General Staff wants? Or are they intervening directly? Either way, I have a bad feeling about this. As Tanya interprets the situation, she presses the radio operator to read the telegram. As the officers listen with question marks on their faces, he responds to her request and reads the mission orders. Quote, "These are search and destroy combat orders for the 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion. All previous maneuvers are to be halted immediately. You are requested to proceed directly to the waters indicated. Locate the enemy and block off the sea. That is all." Jeez, they say search and destroy like it's nothing. Plus, nobody uses search and destroy these days. And mages don't have any way to navigate over the water, so how in God's name are we supposed to find enemies and block off an entire area? Talk about mission impossible. As Lieutenant Serebryakov brings the documents over, Tanya stares crankily at the navigation chart of Norden's coast spreading itself out across her desk. She doesn't even usually look at these things. Realizing this, she can't help an inward sigh. It confronts her with the reality that she will have to fly in airspace with no sense of place. It makes her awfully depressed. "Lieutenant, Get me the combat control map for the Norden Sea area. Call Norden Control. This is making my brain hurt. Tanya shakes her head to clear her mind as Lieutenant Serebriakov brings her the requested map before trying to establish a line through to the local controllers. Yes, ma'am, right away. She hands over the map and receiver with crisp motions. It's Norden Control. We exchange just a curt word or two, and the radio operator connects me to someone from the Navy. It's the worst when they don't pass you off irresponsibly, but actually have good lateral cooperation. At this rate, I won't be able to slack off and blame it on bad coordination. Maybe being too efficient is a bad thing. I suppose I should at least praise the integrity with which they do their work, though. I am a good, upstanding citizen, so it is only right that I commend my fellow countrymen for performing their duties admirably. When I think of that, I guess all I can do is stick it out for the public good. Ugh. Since I have no other choice, I make all the necessary calls without a minute wasted. Griping is a luxury and a waste of time. There is not a day in the life of a corporate warrior that they are allowed the indulgence of wasting time. In order to spend their days off as they wish, the highest level in order to spend their day off, in order to spend their off days, as they wish, the highest level of job performance is essential. What the fuck is the translator doing? That's not how things flow in English. Those words are backwards. They have it written as their off days. It should be their days off. Ugh. In order to spend their days off as they wish, the highest level of job performance is essential. For a soldier, not a thing changes. It's completely the same, in principle. Lieutenant, where is the Northern Sea Fleet now? I'll ask right away. The military machine is starting to move, and I'm one of its gears, Tanya automatically thinks. And this gear needs to know the positions of the remaining Entente Alliance ships, as well as her friendly fleet. She has crammed the general memo concerning the Entente Alliance ships into her head at least, so she dredges it up while quickly confirming the crucial points. Even if the Northern Sea Fleet deployed in this area isn't the Empire's strongest, the High Seas Fleet, it has some... What? Even if the Northern Sea Fleet deployed in this area isn't the Empire's strongest, the High Seas Fleet, it has... Oh, the High Seas Fleet is the Empire's strongest. Why is this fucking written this way? That's not... Okay. I'll just read it as written, but this is not how this should be in English. Even if the Northern Sea Fleet deployed in this area isn't the Empire's strongest, namely the High Seas Fleet, it does have some powerful vessels, including capital ships. That's how that should have been said. It was written poorly. Their training is trustworthy, and ever since the landing operation a few days ago, we have been able to coordinate to some extent. But an unplanned battle is a different story entirely. Tanya manages to consider all the most important facts while having Lieutenant Serebriakov make the appropriate phone calls. She has no choice but to handle this efficiently, but it isn't in an area she has no but it is in an area that she has no experience with, not to mention a rapid response mission at that. Maybe that's why she can't calm down and has only a tenuous hold on the urge to give 1,000 different instructions. She takes deep breaths in a bid to calm herself. Small ones so no one around her will notice. Sometimes it's useful to be short. It makes you less conspicuous, but at times like this, it's really handy. Still, we've never even done an exercise over water, and now we're being thrown into a real, genuine marine battle? The target is a group of fleeing Entente Alliance warships, Missions to assist in pursuit are so hard, it's like trying to negotiate an acquisition without knowing anything about the other side. If we are truly in such a superior position that these talks would work out, it begs the question whether negotiations are even needed in the first place. Hence, each minute feels like 100 years, and when the situation report that Tanya is waiting for comes in, and Lieutenant Serebryakov hands her the receiver, she snatches it away eagerly. With her other hand, she holds a pen, ready to make notes at any moment on the map she had Lieutenant Weiss spread on the table. This is Major von Degrichaff of the 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion. We received a mission to support your ships from the General Staff. What is the current situation? The Second Fleet of battle cruisers has left the Kiel Naval Base. Submarine Task Force 13 went on ahead of them to build a patrol net. Luckily, someone from the Navy who knows what's going on filled her in. According to him, the emergency dispatched battle cruisers are already searching for the enemy. So we shall be the vanguard for the battleships. How thrilling! Lieutenant Weiss has a penchant for keeping things light-hearted, and Tanya makes a mental note. A vice commander who stands out by paying attention to the atmosphere of the troops is hard to come by. But what he said is actually correct. Just being the vanguard would make them look good. What are you getting all excited about? We are a rapid response mage battalion. It's what we do. Soon enough, she receives the report that the unit is ready to sortie. So she goes out to meet them. Await your commander. Battalion Commander Tanya von Degrichaff's expression must look normal to Weiss and everyone else as they meet her with salutes. I am confident that I act the part of an unflappable officer that well. She returns their salutes nonchalantly, glances around, and nods in satisfaction. Well, internally, she's over it all, but still. Thank you. At ease. Lieutenant Weiss. Yes, ma'am. I'll give the briefing. Having one's subordinates do the annoying stuff is the privilege and duty of all officers throughout history. An organization runs on hierarchy by nature. If a superior is stealing work from their reports, that workplace is topsy-turvy. Allow me to reread that. That's a little difficult to follow. If a superior is stealing work from their reports, that workplace is topsy-turvy. Not sure if I follow, but very well. Continuing. Yesterday, before dawn, a scout plane belonging to the 224th Night Reconnaissance Team spotted a gathering of vessels. Photos on the board show multiple Entente Alliance battleships, including a coastal defense ship. The Entente Alliance is hardly a naval power, but it is still an armament lineup on par with what you could expect of a player on the world stage. It is a formidable threat even the Empire can't ignore. To Tanya, the obsession with big ships and their big guns is passé. Still, she is aware they have to be wary of heavily armed combat vessels. As one data point, take the fact that a battleship's naval gun fires way more iron than an entire division of infantry. On top of that, the porcupine-like anti-air fire and marine mage interception makes it a difficult net to slip through. Still, they should be easier to approach than the U.S. ships in the Marianas were. It is a question of how much easier. Upon analysis, the General Staff has concluded these are the main remaining forces of the Entente Alliance fleet attempting to escape. It's obvious, don't you think? We have estimated the various paths they might take, from a beeline for the Republic to a meandering route to the Commonwealth, but it is clear that their ultimate goal is to shake off imperialist pursuit and get away. Naturally, the pursuing side wants to locate and annihilate them as quickly as possible. We have received reports that the Commonwealth Navy is doing exercises just outside of our territorial waters. This is a real headache, to say the least. We've been notified to avoid firing stray shots. On the other hand, we've notified them that regardless of what happens on the open sea, anything violating Imperial waters will be shot at. Overall, it's a delicate situation that puts a huge strain on the nerves. Fleet Command has ordered all ships to find and annihilate the Entente Alliance vessels. The General Staff's order for us is to support them. Lieutenant Weiss narrows down the broad range of meanings support, quote-unquote, could have. Then he looks to me as if the rest is my job. And yeah, I don't want to look like I'm getting paid to do nothing, so I take over the meeting. Battalion. The situation is just as he has laid out. Reconnaissance Mage Task Force 2 with Northern Sea Fleet Command has gone out ahead of us, and apparently a neutral country is hard at work doing exercises in nearby waters. Do take care not to hit them. It must be really hard for the scouts to stay on top of them in this rain. Although I must admit, it seems backward to send a unit to watch the Commonwealth exercises while we are trying to find the Entente Alliance. But there is no reason to lower morale by making that kind of a remark. We are going to head north and meet up with them as soon as we get the data. This goes without saying, but we will be playing it by ear. Understood, ma'am. According to intelligence, the enemy is fast, and apparently they have marine mages in tow. The scope of our mission includes eliminating those, but reconnaissance is top priority. Our mission is of the common enough search and destroy variety. We are just being told to prioritize the search part. Meet at the exercise ground runway in 60 minutes in full gear. Are there any questions? Well, they are my war-obsessed underlings. They're full of fight. Without raising any questions, as usual, the unit eventually takes off an hour later. We head west at cruising speed as we climb. Apart from a few irritating false reports from friendly submarine units, there is no news. If there is anything to say at all, it's that the wind and the rain have both picked up, and our visibility has rapidly deteriorated. I look around, but I can't even see my battalion. However, I'm confident in our ability to fly in formation, so I'll be pretty upset if we get separated and can't bring our full power to the fight. Our saving grace is that we shouldn't have anyone with a sense of direction that is hopeless in this unit. Control to Pixie. No reports of contact. Pixie 01. Roger. How about the weather? Can we expect it to improve? Still, I'm fed up with these tiresome reports from the rear. No reports of contact means that even though we've been flying all this time, we simply have to keep searching. If we wanted to get above the rain clouds, we would have to climb awfully high. Instead, we just get wet. Even though our defensive shells repel water, getting rained on doesn't do much for the mood. Sending warzone data from urban control. Looks like it won't be it. What the hell? That's not a proper sentence. Sending warzone data from urban control. Looks like it won't for a while. I feel for the ground troops. They must be in hell with this cold. The whole combat zone is hard rain and storm winds. A level 2 flood warning and flight restrictions are being issued? Got it. How are the other units in the operation doing? Tanya checks the data as it suddenly comes in and gets confirmation that the weather is only getting worse, which boggles the mind. That said, if the flight warnings become no-fly advisories, they can return to base. First Squadron has left Kiel Naval Base on a search and destroy mission. The Air Force is sending up a Special Force recon company. Make sure you don't accidentally shoot them. We have other forces searching? I suppose that's better than not. Guess we should keep searching till we get permission to go home. That was what she was thinking when... Pixie-01, Roger. Can you let me know where the exercising Commonwealth ships are? Far down. Even in the downpour, an unmistakable roar, and the sound of gunfire abruptly draws her focus to something below her. An explosion? It was the dull boom of something detonating underwater. It reverberates more than you would expect, especially in the quiet night sky. When she squints, she can just barely make out several floating shapes. The next moment, her eyes pop open. In the searchlights are enemy ships. It was an awful sight for the men on board the submarine belonging to Imperial Northern Sea Fleet Submarine Task Force 13. Yes, unlucky 13. The captain, who was looking through the periscope and saw the huge splashes the moment the explosion sounded, was so shocked at first that he couldn't get his mouth closed again. When they realized they didn't hear any secondary explosions, everyone looked to the heavens. The torpedoes had gone off early. Yes, premature detonations. The 6 AALs, AALS, they'd only just been issued really were more useless than actual eels. Okay, editor's note. AAL, AL, the pet name for German torpedoes. In German, Aal means eel. The furious sailors spewed strings of curses, swearing that next time they'd load the torpedo development team, who were only good for wasting the military's budget, into the tubes and fire them at the enemy. To them, the results the devs had gotten meant nothing. The Entente Alliance vessels they'd discovered wouldn't sink. The 6 torpedoes they had launched after making careful calculations in anticipation of success had gotten impatient and blown up too soon. It was no surprise that the navigation officer, who had gone to such great pains to get them into a striking position, was looking dazed. Even the captain's thoughts froze for a moment at the sudden scene that seemed to scoff at all of their hard work. What he saw through the periscope was the Entente Alliance fleet changing formations for counter-sub combat. Then marine mages began sweeping the water's surface for periscopes. As the crew hurriedly pulled theirs in, they found themselves furious. They didn't want to die because of such a stupid failure. In actuality, they didn't know it at the time, but given the outcome, they had actually pulled off a fantastic assist. When the Entente Alliance fleet realized an Imperial submarine was targeting it, it entered counter-sub combat. As a result, if only for a moment, everyone was looking down. And that is why their response to what came out of the sky in the next moment was so irreparably delayed. Make them look down, and then have the real attack swoop in from above for the kill. To Colonel Anson Sue, who realized they'd been caught, it was an awfully cunning 1-2 punch. They got us, those bastards! Where was the leak? No, now they're... Those motherfuckers! It was truly the worst possible timing for the Entente Alliance fleet. Since they had transitioned into counter-submarine combat, the destroyer escorting the flagship had moved away. Not only that, but the marine mages had rushed out to suppress the submarine, and the lookouts, staring into the darkness, were all scouring the sea so as not to miss any torpedo wakes. That was when it happened. The enemy mage battalion that had been lurking in the sky made a full-speed charge at the flagship. Only a few managed to take off, including Colonel Sue. But the Imperial mages plunging down, trading altitude for acceleration, were far faster than they were, and the fact that they had control of the air meant he couldn't think of a way this desperate situation could possibly get any worse. Still, all Sue could do was climb. If he didn't, that ship and the seed of his fatherland's future would be sunk beneath the waves. Major von Degrichaf's feelings at that moment, the time, the place, would be the subject of many inquiries in later years. In reality, the 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion, including Tanya, is in partial chaos at finding themselves in an unexpected encounter, but they manage to charge as a training reflex. Battalion, break, prepare to attack. Making the split-second decision to engage, Tanya enters a headlong dive. She has no experience fighting ships. The reason is that supposedly great balance of power. What the fuck? Making the split decision to engage, Tanya enters a headlong dive. She has no experience fighting ships. The reason is that supposedly great balance of power. That's not a sentence. What the hell is the translator doing here? That makes no sense. The reason is that supposedly great balance of power. What do they mean by that? Thanks to diplomatic efforts, the leading nations have avoided serious armed conflicts up until this war. In other words, this is practically the first mage attack on a ship in history. And that was why it is all they can do to act according to their exercises. She scatters the unit, and, dodging anti-air fire all the while, everyone swoops in at the same time. It is a tactic championed by a doctrine that has only been verified theoretically. No one knows whether it will work or not until the 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion tests it out with their own flesh and blood. Really, the receiving end of the attack was in the same boat. The ability of aircraft to attack ships was only just starting to be discussed, so no one was focused on mages, who have less firepower. As a result, they had only just touched on anti-mage combat in training exercises. In a sense, it was an extremely crude firefight for both sides. Pixie 01 to CP, contact. CP to Pixie 01, what is it? It's hard to do your best when you find yourself stuck in a battle where you weren't expecting to get shot at. In that sense, Tanya can't help but hate the easygoing CP radio operator. Internally, she can't stop griping. What in the hell did you mean telling us there'd be no contact? But a calmer part of her brain isn't very impressed with the enemy's anti-air fire, which is quite a relief. Actually, the enemy's protective fire is so poor it doesn't even come close to the American Empire's anti-aircraft fire that Tanya is thinking of from her memories. It's sparse enough that she can evade simply by flying aimlessly, inwardly outraged and wondering what the other search units have been doing. So it is evident that it isn't much to worry about. I'm taking fire. That's definitely the flash of a battle cruiser's main gun, 200 off the coast of Weinenberg. As she makes the report, she immediately breaks formation. After all, naval guns are a much greater threat than small arms fire, or even most field artillery. Even a single autocannon uses 20mm ammunition, the same class as a heavy machine gun on land. The powerful high-angle cannons are 127mm, which is 12.7 centimeters. Jesus. The shells they are aiming at her won't allow anyone with a human body to just walk away from a direct hit. If we stay in tight formation, the enemy anti-air guns will have their way with us. Battalion, do not bunch up. Make sure that you attack the mages and the ships. Don't get too distracted by one or the other. Everywhere around me is dark, but I'm sure that I'm exposed. When she realizes that, she can hardly believe how unexpected this is. Her mission was to find the enemy. If the submarines, the scout planes that went out ahead, or the company on recon mages discovered the enemy, Tanya's unit might have taken over monitoring, depending on the situation. It was supposed to be an easy mission. Entering the effective firing range of enemy ships and engaging was never part of the plan. But if she squints, she can see a light reminiscent of a muzzle flash from below. It must be one of those submarines of ours torpedoing them. If it wasn't, For the noise from the explosion, I probably wouldn't have noticed it. The thought that she had narrowly escaped making an error frightens her dearly. If she hadn't noticed, she would no doubt have ended up being grilled by an investigative commission. Boy, am I glad the torpedo's wake caught her eye. But I can't be completely happy, because if she had been a little farther away, she could have noticed it and been fine. Nyah! Anti-mage counterattack detected. Anti-air disciplined fire incoming. I'm picking up mages. God damn it! We've got marine mages incoming. Her talented subordinates have an appropriate understanding of the situation, so she isn't actually very worried. But any commander asking their subordinates to act in a situation they haven't been trained to handle has to at least acknowledge their right to scowl. All hands, engage at will. Follow your company commander's lead. As long as they are receiving an organized interception, it has to be dealt with. So she decides that rather than trying to control an entire battalion in the dark, it is better to let each company operate individually. We have to regain some degree of discipline and get the hell out of here. Visibility is poor. Don't lose your depth perception. The air is dense, but don't forget that we are over the sea. Take the humidity from the water into account. Our opponents are used to it. Maintain your altitude. The lower companies, 2nd and 3rd, seem to be in good positions. 1st and 4th were on guard above, so they have some leeway in terms of their altitude. And as long as I am personally commanding 1st Company, I want to push all of the dangerous stuff onto 4th. She makes some quick calculations and decides to adjust some things. God damn it. Draw the mages away from the ships. 2nd and 3rd Companies, you're the vanguard. Keep those mages busy. Marine mages are a threat to aerial mages. It goes without saying that exposing myself to anti-air fire and enemy mages isn't a hobby of mine, even in the worst of circumstances. Even the majority of my war-crazy subordinates probably aren't all that into it. We'd all like to avoid working in dangerous areas if we can avoid it. 4th Company, guard the rear. Help 2nd and 3rd withdraw. A shootout with the ships is out of the question. Really, I want 4th Company as my shield, but that's too much to ask for. In that case, increasing the number of decoys will probably get me the best results. From the enemy's point of view, it must be easier to target the entire battalion. 1st Company, lament your misfortune. 1st Company, lament your misfortune. Sob with joy as your opportunity to earn commendations arrives. Rejoice, for it is we who will harass the ships. Follow me. I'll have my underlings do the dangerous counter-mage warfare, and I will mess with the boats. Understood, ma'am. Plunging into the fleet is a bold move. Allow us to be the vanguard. The elated personnel of my company volunteer, but it wouldn't do for me to follow their suggestion. Sorry, boys. The commander leads the way. Get back. This is the only time believing that commanders should lead the way is useful. Don't get me wrong. It's not like I want to expose myself to enemy fire. Nobody with common sense wants to be out front charging into a hail of bullets. But that's an amateur's calculation. Of course I don't want to do it, but since I know it's the safer option, I choose it without hesitation. Reason trumps fear. To explain it simply, most of the bullets aimed at the leader of a pack will end up hitting the people behind them. In a little more detail, with deflection shooting, if they open fire assuming I'm coming in at 250, all I have to do is approach at 300. The difference will keep me safe in the lead. But what about the ones behind me? Yes, the enemy will correct their deflection to my speed, and it's the ones who follow who will rush straight into that hail of bullets. Also, when moving away after the attack, it goes without saying that I would rather have a shield behind me. Our eyes are in the front of our heads. The more you think about it, the more dangerous the rear starts to sound. In other words, being the bold commander out front is the safest policy in this case. It's said that in war, whether you survive or not is determined by how cowardly you can be. I'm no coward, so I want to calmly maneuver myself into the safest possible position. Follow me, I say again, follow me. For the moment, I look for a ship that isn't firing so heavily. I don't even have to stop and think to know that only war junkies want to get up close and personal with the dense anti-air fire of cruisers or battle cruisers. You can see it in war videos or special reports. The anti-aircraft fire density of American ships was 9 parts bullets to 1 part sky. I would practically despair just watching. I don't care how strong Mage's defensive shells are. I am absolutely not flying into a 127mm high-angle gunshot. This is a night battle, but even if we can expect some help from the cover of darkness, it's too dangerous to aim at one of the big ships known for anti-air fire. Of course, the sensible way to do this is to attack a destroyer. In war, picking on the weak is justice. Hooray for justice. Ah, is that a destroyer? Well, whatever it is, let's go get it. I can't really tell because it's so dark, but there is a turret firing at random, so I can make out the shape of the ship. Considering there are no ships in consort, it must be an isolated destroyer, eh? In that case, we don't have to worry about backup from other ships in the enemy fleet. Based on that interpretation, we get into assault formation. In order to dive all at once from 4,500 feet, we maintain the spindle shape and make minute adjustments to the angle of our assault. Gah, I'm hit. Heading back to base. No escort necessary. But I guess you can't underestimate a destroyer. Just as we were about to strike, one of my men gets hit. The main gun on a destroyer is 127mm and can be effectively used for anti-air fire. So I reappraise the situation and decide we can't take it lightly. My mage who got shot seems able to fly. Well, fine, for now at least. Still, he doesn't look very good, so he has to drop out, I guess. Since his mouth works, he'll fly back to base on his own. There's nothing else that we can do for him. About the only thing we can do is hope he's good bait. Go on, get out of here. Okay, everyone, prepare explosion formulas. Given the typical destroyer's armor, we should be able to take it out if we aim for exposed depth charges or torpedo tubes. Tanya is able to instantly twist her body to evade a shot as she approaches, most certainly a result of her training. Well, would you look at that? I can dodge them, she murmurs. She makes a mental note that her unit probably needs additional training as she returns fire. The ones firing off interceptor formulas from below must be Entente Alliance direct support. Since they are a destroyer's escort, they are probably only a few in number. But if they are brave enough to come up here, they can't be discounted. Just as she is thinking that, she seems to recognize one of the enemies. A mage who gave her a lot of trouble back in the fjord. He looks an awful lot like that fanatically patriotic monster, all right. Maybe it's a coincidence, but you can kill a lousy enemy with less guilt than a good one. In that sense, it's a plus that this guy resembles a lousy lout. It will be refreshing to shoot him. She changes gears and turns her attention to how best to attack. A heavy explosion type would blow up a wide area, but she'd be a sitting duck while she's using it. That is simply out of the question. Shoot with her rifle? That probably wouldn't even count as harassment. Rejected. That's when she realizes. A dive bombing at this speed must have a ton of kinetic energy. A dive at this speed must have a ton of kinetic energy. All I have to do is literally assault them with the sharp end of my rifle. A fleeting intersection. But Tanya's bayonet, propelled at the speed of her dive, cuts through the Entente Alliance mage's defensive shell and twists into him. A bayonet thrust by a mage going over 400 knots is far more damaging than a lance charge from a medieval heavy cavalry member. She jabs it in and, in satisfaction, watches the stunned face of the enemy soldier, who seems hardly able to believe something is piercing his abdomen. But when she tries to pull her bayonet out, she frowns slightly because it seems to have gone too far in and gotten stuck. Even the barrel is sticking into him, and Tanya struggles a bit to remove it. He's trying to say Mary, his daughter's name. The enemy soldier, murmuring something that's not even a word, is fatally wounded. Jeez, what's that all about? She thinks, when she realizes he's groping at the air, trying as hard as he can to bring his writhing right arm around to the submachine gun on his back. So she decides to make a trade. Auf Wiedersehen, she murmurs, the curt farewell with a smile. I admire him for his unexpected stubbornness, but I don't have time to go along with his futile resistance. I have to hurry on ahead. Shoving his right arm out of the way, she steals the submachine gun. Then she kicks the corpse away, already pushing it out of her mind, and takes a quick look at the new weapon she has acquired. It is a standard submachine gun, but oddly enough, it accepts Imperial magic bullets. How nice. This trophy will prove unexpectedly useful. A Christmas present to myself. Anyhow, Tanya smiles at her clear path ahead, feeling quite refreshed, and murmurs, "Now there's something in my way. Now there is nothing in my way." Yes, she's literally kicked the obstacles out of her path. All that's left is to evade the ship's wimpy anti-air fire, strike her blow, and disappear under the veil of night. With that said, war is a gentlemanly fight for survival, wherein one must be the first to do what the enemy hates. And as a civilized individual with an education, Tanya will not use her pretty hands for a sophisticated game of cricket. Okay, editor's note, pretty hands for a sophisticated game of cricket. Cricket is a typical English thing to do. When a British pilot taken prisoner by the Germans was missing a prosthetic leg and asked to be sent one, I guess the British dropped one with a parachute in addition to some bombs or something. When the Germans said it was bad manners, the British were like, "This isn't a game of cricket." Cricket is a British sport, and it's actually kind of fun, I must admit. Anyway, continuing. That's a very obscure joke. Tanya will not use her pretty hands for a sophisticated game of cricket. She understands the need to unhesitatingly kick the enemy's ass. This situation demands the enemy's intentions be thwarted. So what is the best way to bully them? It's simple. The enemy fleet is currently being pestered by submarines, so they have to take counter-submarine measures. If I use an explosion formula with short activation time and get either the ship's depth charges or their torpedoes to blow up in a secondary explosion, this thing will go down easily. Those torpedoes can be used against even a battleship. If I can get them to explode, the destroyer won't stand a chance. If I concentrate my attack on the stern, even with low expectations, there is a possibility of speed reduction. If I concentrate my attack on the stern, even with low expectations, there is a distinct possibility of speed reduction and rudder damage too. And if it dumps the torpedoes to avoid the danger of secondary explosions, well then, the destroyer's ability to counter the submarines will definitely take a dive, and then they can finish the job for us. Not so much risk on my end. This is perfect. There is no law that says a mage can't sink a ship. I'm gonna rock this. We drew off the mages, holding them at a distance now. And the one thing I was worried about, the Marine mages had been pulled away right on schedule. They made it extremely easy by dropping their altitude to work on the subs. Now I should be able to dive without worrying about being attacked from above like an idiot. And I am nominally here to harass them, so this too is perfect. Good. Keep them far enough away that they can't support the ships. Roger that. It'll probably be difficult to hold them until our fleet can get here, but they'll surely be rewarded for hastening the enemy's attrition. After all, we already did a great job by locating the enemy fleet, and we are even coordinating with our submarines, though that was rather sudden and unexpected in nature. All I have to do is report to the brass that we did all that we could with a split-second decision. The best thing to do right now is give the enemy one good hit and RTB, that's return to base. Fighting the ships is a secondary objective. If we return fire, I figure our part of the search and destroy mission is accomplished. Destroying the Entente Alliance ships is the Northern Sea Fleet's job. Okay, first company, if you don't want to be called a bunch of no-achievement knuckleheads, it's time to go to work. We began accelerating again to dive. Unlike air-to-ground attacks, the humidity from the water makes this descent uncomfortable. But we are also in the rain. As expected, the intercepting shots can't catch me, and they fly right past. Unless the enemy are hopelessly incompetent, the rest of the company behind me is in extreme danger. Using your subordinates as bait to survive and climb the ladder is a constant in a corporate setting as well as the military. All hands, deploy your formulas. With that said, to my happy miscalculation, no one has dropped out. Considering it's a destroyer, maybe the last guy who got hit was a fluke. That would make sense. The company efficiently deploys their formulas. The concentrated attacks fly out one after another towards the stern of the ship. This is 4th Company with an impact report. The enemy ship seems unharmed. After confirming impact, I pull up sharply to get out of there. Even if my subordinates are acting as a shield behind me, human flesh is fragile. Their presence is enough to ease my mind somewhat, but I still move at full speed. Only an idiot gets shot down while hanging out observing the results of their attack. A unit spotting from a distance reports the outcome. And according to 4th Company, regrettably, the ship is apparently fine. I knew already since there wasn't a secondary explosion, but it is still a disappointing result. All we do now is hope is that they've jettisoned their torpedoes? The translator fucked up again. This should read, all we can do now is hope that they have jettisoned their torpedoes. Seriously, translator, what the hell? Get it right. Good enough. We achieved our aim of throwing them into confusion. Let's get out of here. Following the swiftly withdrawing 1st Company, the other 3 also begin to move away, keeping the Marine mages in check as they go. In order to get out of there all at once, I pull us into return formation as fast as possible. Well, we didn't do too badly, all things considered. We failed to take out the Marine mages, but the strategic win of locating the enemy can't be ignored. Basically, any further combat would just wear us down without gaining anything. We should let our fleet get some of the credit here. How did we do? 6 mages down and probably moderate damage to an unknown ship. For a destroyer, it's moving pretty slowly. Its engine must be hurting. If we're lucky, the submarines will confirm. What's our damage? We also have 6 with serious injuries and a bunch with scrapes. In any case, none of our men died. That's a blessing in this curse. If we had been up against an American ship, there would probably be heaps of corpses. Taking a look at the actual damage, it's not as bad as I expected. Considering we were up against a destroyer, we could have come out far worse. I'm kind of glad VT fuses aren't unleashing their fury yet. Editor's note, VT fuse, a proximity, aka quote-unquote magic fuse. a revolutionary gadget that makes shells explode when they are near the enemy, but before they actually reach them. We basically lost. How can we show our faces back at base? But the mood is heavy because we weren't able to deal much damage. The lack of secondary explosion could mean that they had already used up their depth charges. But still, that's probably wishful thinking on our part, Tanya laments. But if we encountered the enemy in these waters, they are advancing far too quickly. Major, if you'll forgive me, considering the speed of a destroyer, yes, you're right, it's possible. Still, I can't believe we missed our chance to take out a destroyer. All Tanya can do is bemoan the unexpected encounter. In other words, she wasn't prepared. It was possible for the Entente Alliance ships to be moving faster than the estimate she had given if they had a group of faster-than-average ships. And for just a quick destroyer, it was definitely possible. Calling it unexpected was basically a confession of incompetence. It's possible, but what about the enemy coastal defense ship? This is going to give me a headache. Still, the fact that a superior was strong is no small matter. Well, the fleet coming after us has a powerful attack in store. This probably won't be viewed as that much of a problem. After all, to our fleet of powerful ships, a destroyer is easy prey. At this point, it's more constructive to think about the damage my unit has taken and apply for their retraining and rest periods. Thinking it nearly makes her crack a smile. Of course, I have plenty of experience controlling myself and faking a sorrowful expression. Nah, I should be genuinely sad. The damage to the unit I spent my time training really gets me down. Mages were able to hold their own against an enemy battleship. That in itself is a fine achievement. We shall leave the rest up to our friends. Return to base. We accomplished our mission. Tanya consoles herself, biting back a sigh, and orders her soldier with the long-range wireless set to radio command. After a few coded messages, Tanya is told she's gotten through, so she takes the receiver and gives a straightforward summary of the situation. Pixie-01 to Urban Control. That is all for my report. Urban Control, roger. We'll take care of it. Can you stay on the enemy? The enemy fleet is several ships, including a battleship. They are on a course headed north. They have had contact with our submarines. When I promptly gave command coordinate data and the details of their speed, they asked us to pursue. With all due respect, we have been flying patrol for multiple hours and can't take much more fatigue. Is it possible to spare us further anti-ship combat while we are flying with wounded men? Understood. I've made arrangements for you to land at the nearest base. Wishing you a safe return. Thank you. Over. To Tanya, all she had done was say indirectly that she wanted to go home. The controller probably hadn't been expecting much when he asked. She had no problems getting permission to return to base. But Tanya doesn't know that on the way to the nearby base, the controller was considerate enough to get them accommodation at. She's about to have a rather lovely run-in. Okay, I'm going to read that entire paragraph because that was... To Tanya, all she had done was say indirectly that she wanted to go home. The controller probably hadn't been expecting much when he asked. She had no problems getting permission to return to base. But Tanya doesn't know that on the way to the nearby base, the controller was considerate enough to get them accommodation at. She is about to have a rather lovely run-in with an old acquaintance. Imperial Army Northern Patrol Airspace, Grid B-47. Magic Major Tanya von Degrichaff is the most senior officer in the airspace at the moment, and the senior officer has to make a decision at one point or another. That is why they have given her the responsibility and authority. and the decision, when it comes down to it, will be whatever they believe is the best thing to do. There is something you learn if you read a lot of self-improvement books. Decisions that aren't made in time are pointless. Judgments that come too late mean nothing. Of course, it goes without saying that careless decisions are prohibited. In other words, the most important thing is balance. We can call it an essential skill for any managerial profession. And on this most inauspicious day, the sky over the freezing northern sea has poor visibility. Not only is it the absolute worst possible weather to fly in, but also the fact that we encountered a submarine of unknown nationality over the water on our way home is a turn of events so unlucky that I feel like something is wrong with the theory of probability. And now that we have found it, Tanya, as the most senior officer, is forced to deal with it. She has her troops fan out, and when she glances at their faces, she sees eyes so serious that it makes her sick. Just one shot can kill almost 100 of our own species. And their expressions mean business. These soldiers will do their best not to miss. I really hate this world. May ruin befall this place where humans can't act like humans. And fuck the war laws too while we're at it. Tanya grumbles in her head. Way to blow it by having no provision about a right to innocent passage for submarines. Were you planning on appealing to the principle of legality, or waiting for a decision from a maritime court? This isn't a joke. Before my eyes, a submarine of unknown nationality is attempting to rapidly flee underwater from us, the Imperial Army. This has to happen when I'm in charge of all times. It's moving awfully fast and will probably be completely submerged in less than a minute. But although a minute isn't much, we do certainly have the time. Right now, we can still make it. Submarine armor is as flimsy as paper. My battalion is prepared for anti-ship combat, so we can sink a sub instantaneously. I can't help but feel the eyes of my men turn to me, hoping for permission to attack. It is practically the same look a hunting dog uses to ask permission from its master. Externally, Tanya remains unfazed, but inside she's raging. I am the one in charge. To put it another way, I have to take responsibility for what comes next. Sink a boat of unknown nationality? That'd be idiotic, thinks Tanya, flatly rejecting that fantasy. The laws of war do not permit fighting except between countries already in active conflict. And the worst part is that there are boats from the Commonwealth sailing near here. I should break war laws right in front of the neutral country? Come on, that'd be insanity. The various ensuing problems would wring my neck. It'd be a way bigger issue than compliance. If I don't want to become a political scapegoat, I have to maintain at least a veneer of reason. So do I let it go, right before my eyes, without inspecting it even though we're right above it? That could develop into a huge hairy mess in the Imperial Army. It already looks like I'm forcing a lot of issues in the military organization, even though I'm doing it because I have no choice. So if I let a sub of unknown nationality get away, they won't just let me off the hook. It's an unknown boat operating in these waters. Our waters. It must have some awfully important cargo. I can't overlook that either. And with a little effort, that sub can get away in 2 days underwater. As long as we don't have sonar of some kind, it'll be practically impossible to find it again if I let it go now. Why? Why must I be driven into this kind of a corner? What started all this, the root of Tanya's suffering in this dilemma, was a radio message received after the fight with the Entente Alliance ship as they were on their way back to base. Commander, urgent report of a suspicious boat running dark in our territorial waters at 2 o'clock. I didn't expect to find anything, but if we're flying, we get paid for it. So we headed away from base and ended up involved in a fight with the Entente Alliance. It happened just as Tanya had started grumbling about how if she couldn't warm up by the fireplace with a warm cup of coffee, she wouldn't be able to go on. A report of a suspicious boat arrived. Apparently, some industrious guy had found it. Who was doing more work than they get paid for? She half impressed and half disguised as she cocked her head and then sighed in irritation that she would have to work extra hours, with no overtime pay, in order to deal with it. My battalion was somewhat worn out by the unforeseen battle we had just been in. I couldn't imagine wanting to actively enter combat, but we weren't hurting so badly that we had to avoid it altogether. Well, we can't ignore it. Challenge it. It was a situation that couldn't be ignored, and even though my battalion was on its way back to base, I acquiesced since we were the nearest force. Albeit reluctantly, Tanya and her battalion arrived at the reported sector that had been reported, and they discovered the suspicious boat. Is it one of their transport ships? Is it one of our transport ships? Check its nationality. It's a cargo passenger ship from the Commonwealth, the Lytol. When she called and got a response, it was even more troubling. It wasn't strange for a Commonwealth cargo passenger ship to be there, but that didn't mean she could just let it go. Tell them we're boarding. Are you sure, ma'am? If it takes too long, it will affect our return time. We can't ignore it now that we've challenged it. It's in waters between countries at war. The boat's nationality was too problematic to ignore, which was also a pain in the ass. Yes, ships from neutral countries have the right to come and go as they please, but at the same time, we have the right to board in the territorial waters of countries at war. Obnoxiously, if we didn't inspect this ship, I would need a good reason for it. It's just one thing after another today. How irritating. I want to do my job efficiently, but it's not as if I want to work, so there is no way this will end well. Lytol, this is the Imperial Army General Staff's 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion. We order you to submit to inspection. Cut your engines immediately. I say again, cut your engines immediately. This is Lytol. We are a vessel from a neutral country, the Commonwealth, so we do not believe we are under obligation to comply. Lytol, this is the Imperial Army. Are you carrying any military personnel, or are you operating under the orders of military personnel? Lytol, to the Imperial Army. We are not required to answer those questions. Imperial Army. Roger, Lytol. If that is your decision, we are unable to recognize your immunity to boarding as a neutral country's warship. This is a warning that if you refuse inspection, it will be considered a hostile action, and you will be classified as a hostile nation's vessel. I say again, if you refuse inspection, it will be considered a hostile action. We will have no choice but to sink you. This is Lytol. We've cut our engines. Good. Start the inspection. Lieutenant Weiss, your company is the boarding party. Yes, ma'am. And as for the rest of you, keep watch over the area. Tanya wanted to pull her hair out. The legal exchange was such a pain in the ass, but just as she was pushing the boarding duty onto her subordinates and having the smallest acceptable party pull up alongside the ship, something else happened. Wait a minute. What's that? Lieutenant Serebryakov asked, pointing at something on the surface. She seemed to have found something in the midst of the sea. Drawn by her question, several people followed her gaze and... bingo, I suppose you could say. There was the cargo passenger ship flying the Commonwealth flag, plus a submarine of unknown nationality. And if I wasn't seeing things, they seemed to be transferring something, some form of cargo. It goes without saying that these were two British ladies enjoying a secret meeting. Okay, editor's note. Two British ladies. Ships are referred to as female, and British women are ladies. You all need to play Paradox Interactive Games Victoria, aka Vic, exclamation mark, or maybe take a look at Britannia, the goddess. Oh my. Clearly the author, Carlo Zen, is heavy into video games. This is news. It goes without saying that these were two British ladies enjoying a secret meeting. They couldn't be unrelated. I most certainly wanted to inquire about their relationship. I might have seemed like a paparazzo, and you could say it was bad manners, but I just hoped they'd find it in their hearts to forgive me. Another extra job to do, Tanya lamented. As she was about to send out another boarding party, she was suddenly unsure what to do. Submarines go underwater, as their name implies, but war laws cover only surface boarding rules. There is nothing pertaining to boats that can dive. After all, submarines are a relatively new type of vessel. Since they are used in proxy wars, there is research being done into counter-submarine combat and ways to stop them. But most Navy personnel are extremely underinformed. Still, it is crazy that there is nothing in the naval laws about submarines. I realized it was only a matter of time before unrestricted submarine warfare was declared. But every second Tanya fretted, the situation was developing. The sub was trying to dive before her eyes. In a few minutes, it would be deep enough that our attack might not reach. It would be unable to make a calm getaway. Ah, god damn it! Lieutenant Weiss, capture the lights hall with your company. Immediately. I figure that we should hurry. I wanted to keep them from hiding evidence before the inspection. But what about that critical submarine? If it refused to be boarded, I can shoot. But first, it has to be a warning shot. That is the standard protocol demanded by the laws of war. Submerging isn't denying inspection, technically speaking. Annoyingly, my opponent has slipped through a legal loophole. I love slipping through legal loopholes myself, but I hate it when other people do it for me. I hate when other people do it to me. What suddenly crosses my mind is a compromise. Does it really matter how deep the mire goes? I'm in this bog already. If I'm already covered in mud, it's no big deal if another kind of mud gets involved. I would hesitate to get clean white sheets all dirty, but throwing a ball of mud covered in mud into the dirt won't hurt it. All units on standby. Prepare to attack the submarine. Ready a warning shot. Major? Fire sniping formulas. If it doesn't comply with orders to halt and starts to dive, blow its conning tower off. All we can do now is shoot. All hands, at the same time, prepare to subdue your target. Avoid direct hits. This is for intimidation purposes only. So I'll choose the route that isn't pitch black, even if it is a little dirty. The laws of war do not prohibit shots across the bow. As long as we don't hit them directly, we can claim that they were warning shots. We can't call diving refusing inspection, but it's not exactly cooperative on their part either. If we are firing warning shots to urge compliance, then legally speaking, that's got to be the whiter part of gray. In other words, white. All hands, assault formation, prepare to fire warning shots. The company commanders repeat the orders. My men have just enough self-control to wait when told to heel. If I tell them to intimidate, they should intimidate. Submarines have such wimpy armor that our one depth charge is enough to crush it. If we blow multiple heavy explosion formulas in its immediate vicinity, it won't be able to keep diving. Then all we have to do is stroll aboard once it surfaces. You've got that? No direct hits. So I repeatedly emphasize that we're not trying to sink it. If it sinks, I'll be in real trouble. The opponent is a sub. One depth charge is enough to cave its armor. So at a few near misses. So stop at a few near misses. I'm not listening to any excuses if you sink it. What did they put on board? Depending on that cargo, this could be a major achievement. We can't go lending them a hand by sinking them and erasing all the tangible evidence. We have to secure it. Jawohl, Frau Major. Good, gentlemen. That Commonwealth vessel is watching. Make sure you don't humiliate us. Everyone swiftly gets into formation. The sub doesn't have any anti-air fire to speak of. In actuality, anyone who would be scared of that should be shot. So yes, everyone has calmly, leisurely even, assumed their positions. All that's left now is to decide how much distance to keep. Heavy explosion formulas are different from the simple kind. About 10 meters away should do it. Converted to gunpowder, they are 150 kilos at most. There won't be fragmentation. The water pressure will be enough. Stay 15 meters away from the hull. The worry that 10 meters won't be enough suddenly crosses my mind. Submarines are god-awful fragile. I'm not about to have them too close and send it to the bottom. Considering its half intimidation tactic, half warning, 15 meters should suffice. It might even be a little underconfident, seeing as the water will dull the shock. With that said, it can't be interpreted as an attack. We may be in waters where the Empire and Entente Alliance are at war, but that doesn't mean it's okay to sink a vessel of unknown nationality, which is precisely why commanders forced to make quick, delicate calls can never relax. I fucking hate it. Warning fire at a distance of 15. All right, fire. That's why I have them keep their distance. I shout over and over, so there will be no confusion, that this is only for intimidation. It must be recorded in the unit logs. And the fact that I clearly stated to keep 15 meters away should be in the firing data table as well. In other words, I am compromising myself as little as possible. We've seen it, so the best thing we can do is perform our duty, as ordered. I pour a hefty dose of mana into the computation orb in my hands and put it in firing mode. The cores regulate the energy, and I aim near the submarine my unit is trying to keep from diving. It is a company's worth of disciplined fire from 360 degrees and 15 meters away. The heavy explosion formulas burst in the water. The huge splashes obscure the unidentified submarine. Second company, descend. Prepare to board the sub when it comes up. Well, they were warning shots, but at that range, the sub is probably taking on water. That is the weakness of these valuable submarines. I'm sure a bunch of confidential materials will get ruined, so we have to capture it as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the captain of the Commonwealth S-class submarine, Syrtis, was nearly panicking due to the report of an incoming mage battalion. There's a mole in the intelligence agency. Okay, editor's note. Mole. Spy or double agent, usually the kind who infiltrates a nation's domestic organizations. There's a mole in the intelligence agency. He was aware of the rumors. He and his submarine crew were not about to lose to the subterranean. But unfortunately, diving into intelligence and diving into the sea are two very different things. They knew they had taken measures to preserve utmost secrecy. Security was so tight that when they were dispatched, he could only tell his crew that they were performing an utterly normal navigation exercise. Only the captain knew the true identity of the technical officer, quote-unquote, from the office of the Admiralty who was on board. Only the captain knew about the sealed orders. No one else. They had been so thorough that even the navigation officer wasn't informed until after they had launched and were setting their course. However, there they were at the rendezvous point only a handful of people should have known about. They managed to make the transfer just as the report came in that the Imperial Army was approaching, and the situation rapidly deteriorated. If that hadn't happened, all they would have had to do was play dumb and get past the Imperial Army patrol line. What did it mean that an Imperial Army mage battalion appeared out of nowhere just then? The timing was uncanny. The shock as well was so great that he momentarily locked eyes with the technical officer from the office of the Admiralty. Multiple Imperial Army mages incoming? They saw our rendezvous point with the Lighthall. The enemy must have known about the cargo and the schedule. If not, they wouldn't have shown up here. An auxiliary ship might have been conspicuous, but it's nominally a civilian vessel. The Empire couldn't be rough with a civilian vessel from the neutral Commonwealth. But if the vessel was of unknown nationality, handling it as a belligerent to some extent would be permissible. If they had known that much, planned a raid. If they had known that much, planned a raid. That's not a proper sentence. If they had known that much, planned a raid, there had to be a mole. What they should be saying here is, if they had known enough to plan a raid, then there had to be a mole. They're ordering us to a halt. The radio operator's shout jerked everyone back to reality. The captain had to set aside his doubts for the time being and make it through this moment. An S-class submarine could dive to a depth of over 100 meters. Even mages would have trouble following them if they submerged. It would be a different story if they took a shot to the hull, but the laws of war weren't clear on the definition of halting their ship. Submerging was not officially recognized as fugitive behavior. After all, the laws of war were written before boats went underwater. Cut off all radio communications. Emergency dive. All they had to do was dive before the mages were on top of them. Maintain radio silence. Refuse transmissions. And dive. Just like that. He thought they would be able to escape that way. But his forecast was naive. Just as they opened the vents, the observer shrieked a warning, and the captain learned, whether he wanted to or not, that their opponents lacked the scruples to care. Multiple mana signals detected. All hands brace for... They were going to shoot. When he realized that, his head told him to grab hold of something. But the warning was so unexpected that his body wasn't moving the way he wanted it to. Not many of the crew could get their bodies to cooperate in time. I have to move. Everyone thought so, and when they reached their hands out, they heard a roar. Then came a series of huge shocks to the hull. The captain noted that he felt weightless as the attacks landed, and he lost consciousness. Captain? Shit! Medic! The captain's been wounded! Get to the conning station! He awoke to the sound of someone's raised voice, but not for long. Noting the captain's condition, the first officer prepared himself to take command. The scenario was about as worst case as it could possibly get. Multiple hull breaches, rapidly spreading flooding. On top of that, the water pressure around the bridge had destroyed the periscope. The engines were just barely running. But there was a problem in the battery compartments. They were emitting chlorine gas. Oh boy, they're literally gassing themselves, Jesus. They needed masks for poison gas, but it was all he could do just to get the battered crew moving. Between the flooding and the gas, the environment in the sub was deteriorating quickly. It was only a matter of time until disaster would inevitably drag them to the bottom. To make matters worse, the rudder wouldn't budge. It had probably been damaged by the water pressure, so they wouldn't be able to move properly. There was a limit to the emergency repairs they could achieve. Only one of the drain pumps was working, so they would eventually lose balance and begin to list. With their reserve power situation looking dire, the only choice they had was to surface. "Sir, we can't take any more," he addressed the technical officer. "There's nothing you can do?" He had to make a hard decision, and fast. The first officer didn't really think the mysterious technical officer was a mere officer, so he hinted at him that all they could do was surrender. As long as the captain couldn't command the ship, the first officer was responsible for the lives of the crew. Since they were forced to surface, he had no choice but to say it. "We're not going to last long. If you need to take care of the cargo, let's do it quickly." "Understood." A murmured exchange, and then the technical officer and the first officer went to quickly, quote-unquote, deal with the cargo. It was an awful decision to make, but it was the only way. Okay. Oh, I see. So the cargo was the guy for the new government in exile for the Entente Alliance, and now they're going to quote-unquote deal with him, which tells me they're probably going to kill his ass. Well, that sucks. All right, continuing. December 12th, Unified Year 1924, Commonwealth, Londinium, undisclosed location. What were you doing? An unassuming building stood tucked away in a quiet residential area, isolated from the outside in an inconspicuous way. The building's interior was in the midst of a storm that struck a perfect contrast with its quiet environs. Not so much as a molecule of the genial Christmas spirit of the world at large could survive there. Particularly violent was Major General Habergram of the Foreign Strategy Division, who was abusing the line of intelligence officers resoundingly. He pounded the desk with his clenched fist almost hard enough to break it. A half-assed explanation wasn't going to cut it. The intelligence officers standing there were as pale as prisoners about to be executed by firing squad. Well, it was only natural. Of course, the general's fury would be violent when he'd been woken from a nap because the plan he'd forgone sleep over, Well, it was only natural. Of course, the general's fury would be violent when he had woken up from a nap because the plan he had forgone sleep or rest to realize was ruined in the span of a single night. He had figured out the Imperial Army aerial units' patrol lines and analyzed their Northern Sea Fleet's patrol routes. He had checked the speed of that fleet and adjusted the Commonwealth Navy's exercise schedule accordingly as a sufficient distraction. In a single moment, all his efforts went up in smoke. General Habergram was by no means the only person in the Commonwealth grinding his teeth in disappointment. The need for a sweeping investigation into the causes of the problem had been acknowledged. At this point in time, the ones getting the murderous looks were the security officers. Their stomachs probably couldn't take much more of this. Why were there Imperial mages over there? How did this happen? The failures of the intelligence agency had been in question for some time. But now there were getting to be too many to brush off as coincidences. One of the two incidents could be unfortunate mistakes, but by the time the third one happens, it's an inevitability. When the voluntary army that had been sent out to gather intel and observe was pinpointed and bombarded by mages, it was still possible to suspect coincidence. They were working on improving the apparatuses after they concluded that reverse detection of the surveillance waves could have been the cause. It was not out of the question to call it an unfortunate accident or coincidence. But this time it was too hard to fathom it as a coincidence. He couldn't accept it. They were targeted so precisely. We are performing a thorough investigation, but thus far we can only imagine that it was a coincidence. The Empire might have a good intelligence team, but I really don't think they would have known about this. Then explain this video. The footage of the battle he projected shut up the officers who were trying to object. Even though the details were hazy with static thanks to the dense concentration of combat mana, what it showed was clear. The Imperial mages moved in perfect formation towards a single target. Other ships tried to draw their fire by attacking, but the enemy unit ignored them. Not only were they not afraid of getting hit, they maneuvered as if they weren't even taking the possibility of damage into account. Then they held back the Marine mages who went up to intercept them and dived in assault formation. The log blacked out when an Entente Alliance mage who went to intercept fell as a corpse into the sea after being mercilessly bayoneted and kicked away. The last image was the enemy mages darting straight for the battlecruiser. Yes, one glance made it obvious. They were clearly aiming for a specific ship and paying no attention to the others. I ask you all, why? It was the question of a man about to explode at any moment. Why is the named who was supposedly deployed in the northern zone lying in wait for us here? Then his thunder crashed. All the intelligence officers could do was pray for the storm to pass. According to their careful analysis, the Imperial named had seemed to be providing support to the northern lines. Central had taken the trouble to dispatch this named unit, and the intelligence officers had given a partially incorrect warning that they were going to be supporting an offensive. Against their expectations, the named unit appeared far from the sector they had been stationed in. At first, they wondered if it was an unknown elite unit, but the recorded mana signatures answered that question immediately. They matched the signals of the named unit who had just previously been spotted in the Entente Alliance. Looking at the combat logs, it was obviously the same unit who had been so kind as to demolish the voluntary army there just the other day. Really, it was hard to imagine them being here. Considering the Imperial Army's rotation of combat and rest, it was far too soon. The fighting in the north is intensifying, and they are planning an all-out offensive to mop up the Entente Alliance. Why would they dispatch such a powerful mage unit out here? Yes, their analysis said that the Imperial Army, which had carried out a landing operation that ignored communication lines and the power of the Commonwealth's Navy, was preparing an operation to finish off the Entente Alliance. Why would they just happen to send an elite unit to this area at a time when the Northern Army Group probably needed all the help that they could get? These were the guys who were amassing all available arms, ammunition, and personnel for the northern lines. So this maneuver clearly had to be the result of a plan, not of coincidence. This was the same named unit who was spotted during the landing operation. If it had been pulled and then appeared on the Rhine lines, you could call it proof that the Empire was prioritizing the Rhine front. But just when they noticed they had stopped seeing it on the northern lines, it was instead lying in wait for departing Entente Alliance ships and their submarine in the Northern Sea. Most importantly, look at this. They made a beeline for the middle of the fleet without even looking at the vanguard. The attack was too efficient to be explained as a chance encounter. For starters, look at how the mages suddenly attacked just as a sub distracted the fleet with a torpedo, causing everyone to look down. How elite mages dropped out of the sky just when everyone's minds were blank. And physically, the fleet had broken formation to perform evasive maneuvers with too perfect timing. But then, they didn't even touch the Vanguard destroyers. As a result, they were able to go undetected for some time. They ignored the intercepting attack that had just barely occurred at all and headed straight for their objective. If that was a coincidence, it had to mean about a dozen ladies of luck were smiling on the Empire. But that seemed utterly impossible. We also have record of some kind of transmission above the fleet. Were the mages filing a report right before going into assault formation? There was no chance it was a report of enemy contact. But in that case, you'd think they would have done it sooner. If they were there to restrain them, they wouldn't have had to approach so closely. But if they were an attacking unit, there should have been a combat control team. Unexpectedly, encountering an unguided battalion of mages. Don't be ridiculous. Plus, it happened right after the submarine attack. If it wasn't planned, and it wasn't the kind of coincidence only God could conceive of, it simply wasn't possible. Oh, being X out of saying that, I guarantee. They started drawing off the escorts straight away, and on top of that, one company went right for the battlecruiser. All you can do is laugh. Anti-air fire doesn't score that many direct hits. The Navy and even the Army knew that, but the difference between knowing something and experiencing it is night and day. Would you charge a battlecruiser lined with autocannons simply because the shots don't usually connect? Normally, there would be some hesitation. Even if they didn't hesitate, there would have been various ways to go about it. If attacking was their aim, deploying barrage formulas at range would have been one option. A mage's extra long range barrage formula would be able to get past most anti-air fire. Of course, the marine mages were there to keep them from doing just that, but they had been pretty much caught by surprise. So although a handful of direct support mages put up the best resistance they could, it was utterly futile. And they were scattered. The enemy mages were emitting such tranquil signals we didn't discover them until they were right on top of us. So they must have been working really hard to conceal them. Look, from the mana signatures, it seems like the named is leading this formation. Did the Entente Alliance miss the signature of the named because they were incompetent? Observing the mana isotope of the flight leader is the most basic step to take. Okay, editor's note. Flight leader, the one in front who guides the others. They mark bombing objectives, guide available aviation units, and so on. So it is a job for veterans. Leaders are important, and thus make key targets when taking out enemy formations. Where was I here? Observing the mana isotope of the flight leader is the most basic of steps to take. It is easy to detect it so long as the mage isn't limiting output to conceal themselves. A unit putting a check on enemies might be able to limit output. It was a standard way to extend one's airtime and liked for the way it lowered one's chances of being detected. But could a battalion flying at high speed possibly do it? Granted, it did temporarily increase your endurance, but in the end, your fatigue would spike. It would be out of the question to enter combat under such circumstances. So perhaps they were limiting output for some other reason. Not a sneak attack. But then, right after that, the same unit raided the waters where their auxiliary ship and submarine were meeting. No matter how optimistically someone wanted to interpret the situation, it was only natural to suspect a giant intelligence leak. Rather, if the enemy was acting this boldly on their intelligence, they probably weren't even trying to hide that they were getting it. They considered saying it was so obvious it was unnatural. But they thought they had looked deep into all the circumstances, and yet they still couldn't get the possibility out of their heads. And that was the demands of their job. In an information war, truth was never guaranteed. Even if something seemed correct, the mere appearance of accuracy wouldn't help them. And that was why they had to suspect every possibility, including the hypothetical leak. What did you find out in the hunt? Acknowledging the hypothesis had serious implications. If there wasn't a leak, they had no explanation for the enemy's actions. Naturally, the intelligence agency had launched a major operation in great haste to whack all the potential moles and clean out the organization. The assumption being that if they could just find the culprit. Everyone was about ready to cry because they hadn't found the slightest sign of the enemy. The people in charge of the investigation had come up with no evidence and no support. But if there wasn't a huge leak, then they were saddled with the bigger problem of having no explanation for the situation. They really were at their wits' end, about to break down sobbing. We considered code issues, a double agent, or betrayal, but so far we're clear. We have no idea what caused this. We're still waiting for the actual results of the investigation, but I can't imagine the code is broken. We're not using anything except one-time pads. A double agent or traitor isn't terribly likely either. The number of people with access to this information isn't even in the double digits. It's possible that they were a lookout on the flank of the main Imperial fleet headed north. Perhaps it really was just an unfortunate coincidence. It wasn't as if the intelligence agency and it wasn't as if the intelligence agency and its officers were doing nothing. They had arrived at this word coincidence after suffering through endless investigations that exhausted every other avenue. Now, all they could do was tell their irate boss their troubling conclusion. That perhaps it simply was a coincidence. Over the course of the hunt, a few moles had been discovered and purged. Still, they were in the clear. At this point, wasn't it just an unfortunate accident? If it was only a matter of time until a number of people began to, it was only a matter of time until a number of people began to think that. Actually, some were even saying it, given the report that the Entente Alliance fleet had been able to escape the Empire's Northern Sea Fleet to meet up with the Republic fleet in the end. But that idea was rejected outright due to one piece of unmistakably clear evidence. The reports from the intelligence and naval officers dispatched to the Entente Alliance ship as military observers. The details written there were enough to silence anyone claiming it was a coincidence or an accident. No, it blew them right out of the water. A big augmented battalion of mages just happens to encounter the battlecruiser with the counselor who would form the government in exile, and they just happen to attack and concentrate their fire on where that vital politician is. And immediately before, the submarine torpedo attack with perfect timing, right as the ships abruptly shifted to counter-sub combat, and the direct support marine mages were flying low on patrol. The Imperial mages used their altitude to their advantage and swooped out of the sky. It was awfully well coordinated if they weren't waiting for us. Then, as if they had done what they came to do, the enemy mages left after only one strike. For General Habergram, the best news they had woken... For General Habergram, the bad news that they had woken him up for was enough to make him nearly crush the pipe in his hand. The attached photo made it clear that they had focused their attack on a single area, an area that was almost never considered a strategic target. In anti-ship warfare, there aren't many methods of effective attack, maybe a heavy explosion formula or a gravity formula aimed beneath the target's waterline. But they took the trouble to aim for the living quarters with anti-personnel explosion formulas. Maybe against the bridge it would be understandable, but they aimed directly at the living quarters. That is, the entire company concentrated their fire on them. And this had been noted already, but according to the reports, after recklessly charging in and bombing their target area, they all left without any further combat actions. They left as if they had no time to lose. They must have been on their way back to base. Theoretically, it was possible to insist that coincidences had just stacked up. But what are the astronomical odds of the coincidence where an enemy who waited so persistently only to strike once and rush away, subsequently runs into the Commonwealth's auxiliary ship and sub on their way back? Quote-unquote, on their way back. You don't even have to think about it. The odds are infinitesimally small. And is there anyone who believes that was a coincidence that they ran into our boat on their way back just because it was bobbing out there looking suspicious? It was a rhetorical question containing his fury. He was all but saying that if anyone did, that first pounding into the table would smash into them instead. He squared his shoulders imposingly, while inside him the hurricane was raging. What a priceless fluke. Of all the coincidences that could possibly happen, this one's a real riot. Shouting, he slammed his fists onto the table again, paying no mind to the fact that he had started bleeding, and fell silent as though he'd lost the power of speech. He had always been praised as an unflappable paragon of composure. And yet... Same day, Imperial Army General Staff Office, Joint Conference Room. The situation was bad if the Service Corps staff, the intelligence staff, and the operations staff were all at wit's end. Maybe there was some kind of political strategy problem or some kind of military issue. It was natural that the staff officers would be worried about how to get things under control. Well, they had probably also started thinking about who was to blame. What? We lost the Entente Alliance ships? That accurately summed up the sentiment of all of the army officers present. No, all the participants' thoughts could be expressed that way. Not that they'd had them trapped like rats, mind you, but everyone had believed it was certain, given the power balance, that they would deal with the enemy ships. That they would deal the enemy ships a serious blow in this naval battle. It had been finally a chance for the idle navy to shine and show some results. But the staff's expectations had been magnificently betrayed. The Northern Sea Fleet failed utterly to relocate them. Even though we succeeded in building up superior fighting capabilities? Yes, it seems that they've gotten away. They let them get away? Jesus Christ. Not that the fleet was perfect, but they have managed to gather a fair number of capital ships. They were also able to choose the battleground. It was only natural to have high expectations under those circumstances. Were all of those fleet maneuvers just a waste of heavy oil? The stern gazes from the army seemed to contain a rebuke. What is the meaning of this? They seemed to say. The confused naval officers bearing the brunt of it were forced to present materials and attempt to explain themselves. No, the weather was horrible. The fact that we even made contact twice was a fluke. It's incredibly difficult to relocate a fleet, especially under those conditions. There was nothing easy about finding something in the sea. Even a fleet of warships is nothing but a speck in the wide open water. Unless you control all sides of an area, it was impossible to patrol it perfectly. How well you could do so was practically up to probability. For that reason, the Navy prioritized inferences based on past experience. To put it another way, the Imperial Navy's lack of experience was enough to break them down into tiers. Though the expansion of their hardware was on schedule, the personnel operating them still required improvements. But that's your job. Still, it was true that griping about it wouldn't get them anywhere. They didn't need to be told that doing their best was what they were given, with what they were given was demanded of military men. In that case, the Navy had to supplement their perfectly adequate hardware with quote-unquote software that could operate it in the front. They had to supplement their perfectly adequate hardware with quote-unquote software that could operate it in the form of quality manpower. Still, I guess saying any more at this point won't change anything. Major General von Zatour figured that was enough useless finger-pointing and chiming in to end the venting. As far as he could tell, the Army had already expressed most of their complaints and discontent. The Navy was getting near the end of their rope. Any more of this was just a waste of time. Yes, he made up his mind there and then to end the witch hunt and proposed that they work towards a realistic solution. All we can do is consider our next step. Does the Navy have anything to suggest? After finishing his question, he gave a stern look to any Army officers who seemed to have more to say, and slowly took his seat. An officer from the Navy stood, apparently waiting for the chance. What a young kid, Zatour thought, as he changed gears. We would like to prevent their meeting with the Republic by getting some assistance on the diplomatic front. In the documents they had been given, there was a plan that included an opinion from the Foreign Office. There was not a problem with the proposal per se. He actually thought it was fairly well put together. At least, it was reasonable. Making use of the duties of neutral states, eh? But do you think the Commonwealth will actually fulfill them? But reason is not all that matters in a fight for the survival of a state. If that were the case, the world would already be a utopia, and the absence of a heaven on earth made their position all too clear. The Foreign Office thinks it's tricky, but honestly, they won't, right? Not sure I follow, but whatever. The Commonwealth would probably just demand they leave within 48 hours. He didn't think it would actually take measures to disarm them like it was supposed to. The military attaché the military attaché's confirmation would be resisted with procedural delays. By the time permission was granted, the boat would have left the bay, in which case those ships will waltz over to meet up with the Republic fleet. Ugh, that means Entente Alliance resistance will drag on. Inconveniently for the Empire, the Commonwealth and the Republic had more than a little adjacent territorial water. Since it was out of the question to battle in the Commonwealth's territory, there was no real way to prevent the ships from getting to the Republic once they'd lost sight of them. And if the Entente Alliance ships were fighting with the Empire, it could create issues with convincing them to surrender. Look, our navy still fit as a fiddle, the enemy would say. They were trying to discourage further resistance at this juncture, so the issue had the capacity to develop into quite a headache. There is not really anything else we can do but sink them ASAP, which is to say as soon as possible. There was no other way to rapidly gain control of the situation and minimize collateral damage. They had to sink all those Entente Alliance ships. And soon. Missing a single ship or two was one thing, but they had let them all get away. Sinking a few enemy vessels was no longer enough to resolve the problem. The only option their current situation permitted was to swiftly sink as many ships as they possibly could. That was the only way to stop the issue from evolving any further. So, in order for the Northern Sea Fleet... the orders for the Northern Sea Fleet are still to promptly sink the ships. Is that correct? That works. The Navy had no objections either. Then we shall continue to provide support. I just wanted to get this resolved as soon as possible. Garrison of the 203rd Mage Battalion, Battalion HQ. It had crystallized into something pure and tranquil, a madness that had precipitated as a faintly black sediment and then festered and condensed. Those nightmarish eyes seemed to invite insanity into everything they fell upon. It was all you could do to resist the bewitching gaze if it landed upon you. Your orders, please, Colonel. Lieutenant Colonel von Legren exhaled lightly and finally drew air into his lungs once again. Sunlight streamed in through the window. It seemed a warm day for winter, but his body felt like it was enveloped in cold. The reason was simple. The incarnation of madness before his eyes. Major von Dekrichaff, you've been transferred. Preparations were underway for a large operation on the Rhine front, planned and drafted with an unprecedented amount of leverage from Major General von Rudersdorf, Deputy Director of Operations, and the support of Major General von Zetour. So they needed all the reinforcements they could get. And they would need support for those reinforcements as well. Of course, as a bit of an obnoxious errand, there was a court-martial waiting for her at Central. A formality, really. After all, though she hadn't realized it was a neutral country's boat, she had sunk a Commonwealth submarine as a suspicious vessel in an unfortunate incident. With that said, it would be a court-martial in form only. Of course, I can't say it won't be a bother, but it's really mostly a formality. I'm expecting your best. So, this'll be a chance to redeem my reputation, eh? But the little major before him didn't make an effort to understand any of that. Apparently, she was taking the unofficial transfer orders he'd shown her as bad news. Maybe she was also a bit nervous about the trial. She had a warped sense of responsibility, but the thought of being called to account made her shiver. Ugh. A mere major had to take responsibility for everything. He had a strange feeling that something more horrifying than chilly air was blowing through the room. Or maybe like he had been hurled into the fissure separating normal and abnormal. You succeeded in locating the enemy unit. It's not your fault. Nobody was asking any more than that of you. I had our sworn enemy right in front of me, and I let him get away. Next time, I'll get them for sure. His intercession didn't accomplish anything, but the words weren't just for show. That her unit had located the enemy at all, in those horrible weather conditions, was impressive to say the least. They had also dealt some damage to the enemy marine mages. Even if the results were not perfect, there was probably only one person who didn't acknowledge them as acceptable, and that was the Major herself. Major, don't worry, I won't repeat this mistake. I swear to you that it won't happen again. But that person wouldn't acknowledge anything less than perfection. Horrifyingly, her frame of mind seemed to be a combination of bloodlust and patriotism molded into the form of a soldier's psyche. Rather than a soldier, she was more a doll shaped like one. The words she repeated over and over, practically delirious, exuded a strange urgency. One time, just one time, she had gotten merely satisfactory results, and this was her state. How much of a perfectionist can you be? She had no interest in anything except for following her orders to the letter. What kind of education do you have to give a child to warp them into this? Don't fret, Major. We are pleased with what you have achieved. All you need to do now is accomplish your missions. Don't worry, I won't leave a single ship behind. I'm not getting through to her at all. It looks like we are having a conversation, but something is making us talk past each other. All I did was encourage her to accomplish her missions. Why does that make this ball of insanity overflow with a will to fight and declare her intent to annihilate? How war-crazy can you get? Though she's the best the Empire has ever produced, she's the worst war nut I've ever seen. Can a mere person be so joyful about killing their fellow men? Can a mere person carry out any and every military duty so faithfully, with no hesitation whatsoever? Unless your foundation as a human being was off kilter, this level of incongruity was impossible. No one at the General Staff Office has any issues with your actions, Major. It was a fact he had to express to her as a messenger. Customarily, typical notices to unit commanders conveyed expectations that they eliminate enemy units. They were practically season's greetings, but what he had to express this time was not superficial consolation, but unmistakable forgiveness. But, in some corner of his mind, reason was warning him. This monster in front of you might actually do it. But, Major, thus, if you do want to contribute to the fleet's efforts, he gave her as much consideration as his discretion would allow. It is planning a war game in the Northern Sea. I don't think anyone would mind if you participated before going to the Rhine. I volunteer, she said without hesitation. Great. I'll make the arrangements. As she gave the reply he expected, Legren caught himself feeling relieved that this would bring closure to the matter. I wish you and your unit much success. Good luck." Feeling a slight chill, he dutifully answered with the required encouragement, speaking quickly. She and her men were on his side, at least. As long as the tip of her spear isn't pointed at my beloved fatherland, what is there to fear? He suffocated his mind with that question to deceive himself. Thank you. Whether she knew it or not, as she bowed, Major von Degrichaff was an outstanding model soldier. Battalion garrison, large auditorium. To express the feelings of Magic Major Tanya von Degrichaff in a nutshell, I've escaped by a hair. I've escaped by a hair's breadth from death. I was trembling in fear of a rebuke. But when I opened the envelope my friend Colonel von Legren brought from the General Staff, it was just an administrative note. I really expected a reprimand over my failure in that mission, but I guess the brass is more lenient than I thought. Relieved, Tanya drains her cold coffee with an involuntary sigh and smiles wryly, thinking of how uncharacteristically nervous she had been feeling. There's the court-martial coming up, but it's supposed to be nothing more than a discussion held as a formality, which means Tanya's been unofficially given a mostly unexpected pardon. She was only informed verbally, but given that it was the word of a staff officer, it has to be true. In other words, the fact that Legren, someone she knows, delivered the note in person had to be a token of consideration from the higher-ups. Legren's report must be a roundabout way of saying that the brass hasn't forsaken me yet. It is a kindness that says, "We'll keep you around, so show us you can still get results." If I am receiving this sort of understanding, the General Staff must still have high expectations for my unit and me. I mean, they were nice enough to spare me mental stress by giving me a heads up, albeit only verbally, that I would be found not guilty. If it were me and my subordinate was being incompetent, I wouldn't give a damn about their mental health. I'd advise them to resign. Wouldn't anyone? Even in the army, where you can't lay someone off, they'd have to be ready for some sort of disciplinary action. But apparently, the higher-ups are letting me off the hook this time, and giving me a second chance. To put it another way, I can't expect them to be so lenient again. They are even giving me an opportunity to show off my abilities in this war game. I definitely have to live up to the expectations of the General Staff and the brass this time. Still, I wonder, who's the one making allowances for me? If I am getting off so easily, someone in the totem pole is pulling the strings. There are only a few people it could possibly be. Someone who has influence higher up, but would also deign to do me a favor. It has to be someone in General von Zatuer's camp. I'll have to thank him sometime soon, Tanya muses, her mood improving slightly after considering her good fortune to have such a great superior in the army, where soldiers don't have the luxury of choosing their bosses. I really can't thank him enough. Then, with a single deep breath, I amble leisurely to the room next door. In the worst-case scenario, I thought the battalion might even be broken up, so I had summoned them all in case I needed to explain. They are already waiting. Everyone is exhibiting proper concern, and they seem ready to listen, which is endearing. I'll tell them the good news. Tanya slowly begins to speak. Battalion, I don't believe in God, not even a little bit. If you do exist, grant me the power to feed Being X to pigs after cramming him through a shredder. Tanya doesn't say that part aloud, but I think it. Nothing happens. I sigh inwardly. The troops lined up here are way more useful and a hell of a lot more loyal than some non-existent god. A great commander of ancient times said that the 100 men you have are better than the 10,000 you don't, and he was quite right. Of course, if I loosen the reins, they'll go racing off to the battlefield. So that gives me a splitting headache, but anyhow, I have a chance to make up for the mistake I've made. She takes the dais and decides to give her troops a few inspiring words so that she can restore her reputation. Gentlemen, while I may not believe in God, I do believe in the General Staff. It is a bastion of logic and wisdom. Dear God, if you are so great, try being ethical. Then I'll show you that the General Staff's wisdom is greater than yours. The Imperial Army General Staff exists for real. God, or whoever else, only exists as an idea. In other words, he's a fantasy. That is ethics. If you want to oppose the rule of law, the generally accepted universal principles, then you have to show us something greater. To neglect them, unilaterally claim you exist, and declare your own laws to ask us to fulfill a one-sided contract. To neglect them, unilaterally claim you exist, and declare your own laws is to ask us to fulfill a one-sided contract. On that point, the kind-hearted General Staff shows mercy even when we err and give us chances to redeem ourselves. But Tanya won't forget her failure. Colonel von Legren and the General Staff are considerate enough to be indirect about it. But it is torturous. It is in other words, my failure. I want to impress these things on my disheartened troops. So I issue a declaration. These are the kinds of subtleties? Subtleties. It's typed wrong. It's a fucking typo. These are the kind of subtleties middle management has to instill in their subordinates. People don't expect anything from an entity with minimal presence. My brothers in arms, the General Staff, maybe even the Empire itself, has great expectations of us. Our duty and dedication are our honor. And that is also a parody reference, I believe, of My Honor is Loyalty, which is the motto of the SS. Interesting. Of course, Tanya was convinced that the higher-ups were disappointed in them. She could have nothing if they had been deemed useless. If a person in manufacturing somehow made an inventory management error by going out on a business call, it wouldn't matter how well he did the meeting. He would have to endure castigation for his incompetence. It is the will of the army to give us a chance. We have been granted an opportunity to atone for our mistake. The General Staff Office even sent someone in person. It means that we have not been forsaken. There is still the danger of being sent to serve in some penal battalion, but we will just have to overcome it by amassing achievements. I don't care if it's purgatory. We'll go there, and we'll conquer it, because that's what soldiers do. We go anywhere we are ordered. That fundamental principle goes without saying, but it is important to constantly review the basics. Heinrich's law is a warning against letting minor errors pile up. Okay, there should be an editor's note here. Heinrich's law. What the hell is Heinrich's law? In any case, I'll probably edit something in for the footage later to denote that. I wonder if it's related to Heinrich Himmler. Don't know. Taking a heavier hand to prevent accidents is elementary. So let's do a mission right now. Let's do it ourselves. Commander? Vice Commander Weiss is Vice Commander Weiss is interrupting me. Am I repeating myself too much? I feel rather hesitant, but somehow from my education at the military academy, something from my education at the military academy crosses my mind. Never waver in front of your subordinates. But I'd rather regret doing something than aimlessly doing nothing. Having made up my mind, she just barely maintains her unconcerned expression and glances around. Well, the battalion personnel don't seem to be so sick of my insistent confirmations. People who value the basics are the kind of talent I wish I could just put in my pocket. Let's show the Empire how great their watchdog is. I make sure it registers. Basically, the army is an instrument of violence that serves as a watchdog to the state. We need to show them that we have no intention of bucking the state's control. You never know whose eyes might be out there glinting as they watch. It is good to appeal to their loyalty to a slightly underhanded degree. It is a million times better to have them laughing at me than putting them on their guard and trapping myself. Besides, I can just give anyone who laughs a beating. Let's teach those rats that no matter where they run, we'll be on their tails. Let's think a step further. I'm acting like Suji right now. Would anyone with common sense like him? Fat chance. I have the feeling they probably hated him. And why? Because he would act without consulting anyone. Of course, if a sensible person like me had a subordinate like Suji, they would stand up before a firing squad. After all, he was the kind of guy who'd go making his own arbitrary decisions. How useless can you get? And does my vice commander have common sense? In other words, has he concluded that I'm a Suji who might go on a rampage? Well, that's no good. I'm actually a sensible person who feels shame. I don't want to make decisions on my own and then shove the responsibility onto others. Plus, following rules is the meaning of my existence. I don't want to break them. I find loopholes instead. Oh, joy. Lieutenant, we are being transferred to the Rhine. Some of you have fond memories there. Yes, gentlemen, the Rhine. Sweating bullets at this misunderstanding, Tanya racks her brain. Honestly, I want to avoid being seen like Suji, General Brute Gucci, and those other guys. If Lieutenant Weiss thinks of me like that, I'll need to have a talk with him in private. Though brooding inside, she concentrates on getting through the current moment. The Rhine? Well, we'll be in a rush, but they are expecting a lot of us. We are going to do a counterclockwise sweep of the battlefield. We just bop the guys who have the gall to show up. That's it. We don't get paid to do more. There is also the idea of working hard to get promotions. But in the army, getting promoted doesn't always mean you'll be happy. As long as that is the case, I'd like to cut off my efforts where my pay grade ends. Why in the world is this happening? No, I know that being X is at the root of all this. Tanya laments. I think twice about acting too much like Suji. Next time, maybe I should speak frankly with my troops. Should I ask Sabryakov what they think of me? Or should I ask Weiss how they are doing? So, yes. But before that, we are going to play a little game of marine mages. Rejoice. The Navy has better food, right? No, it doesn't. But that's a job for later. For now, I have one piece of good news that is worth telling them. Navy meals are much higher quality than the Army's. I'll be damned. The Navy lambasts the Army for spending too much on hardware, and frankly, the Army can't deny it. Because on the software side, the Navy surpasses the Army with their quality food. From a welfare standpoint, the Navy is certainly a much more desirable place. Huh? Courtesy of Colonel von Legren, we are going to go help out the fleet. January 18th, Unified Year 1925. Imperial Navy, Northern Sea, Fleet Commands Exercise Area 2. At 100 feet, scowling at the spray, Major von Degrichav gives the order for boarding assault formation. The idea is to practically skim the water without dropping their speed and charge their target. Responding to her directions, the companies all get into formations that support one another. Beneath her serious expression, however, Tanya is shocked. They were told they'd be flying into anti-air fire, so despite it being an exercise, she expected an appropriate interception. Instead, she's compelled to worry. Are they actually shooting? She's puzzled by the weak intercepting fire. Surely they're going to fire on us, even though it's an exercise. We are performing an attack on a ship using visual combat maneuvers with a clear view. According to the scenario, we have already deployed a smokescreen to foil the intercepting fire. Tanya hides in the smoke and gets down to business, finding it disappointingly easy to reach boarding distance. Enemy mage incoming on the starboard side. Prepare for a close quarters fight. Anyone not occupied, come starboard. A few petty officers on deck begin moving to handle the situation, but they are hopelessly slow. It is already too late. Once you let a mage get this close, you can't avoid a fight on the deck. Maybe they weren't expecting it, but this is still just pathetic. Inside, she wonders, is this a trap? Like the wily ones people used to plan back in the age of sailing ships? I'm pretty sure I've read nautical novels where confusion on the deck turns out to be a trick. But no matter how I look at it, the opponents running hither and thither everywhere I can see them seem a bit too inexperienced. The deck may be narrow, granted, but I even see some soldiers and sailors tripping. If that's acting, they would have had to spend an awful lot of time training to fall so naturally. Magic blades up, company on me. Anyhow, leading the charge again, Tanya has no choice but to maintain her speed perfectly and swoop in. She even deploys an interference formula right into the panicking cluster of sailors. As some of them go flying, the sailors grow even more confused, and the marine units that came running get caught up in the mess. The rest of my company coming after me hinders the marines' efforts to restore discipline. They miss their chance to stop us, too busy with the exchange of checking fire. Don't let up, keep shooting. Fix bayonets. All hands, fix bayonets. A handful of officers and sailors just barely manage to fight back, but they are not enough to keep the force of the attack at bay. Tanya and her company easily break through their defense. Then they stab the second bridge's soft shrapnel shielding and cling to it with their magic blades. Pardon me. We didn't slow down at all. One of the internal frames probably got dented. Watching us come in is probably freaky as hell. Land and capture. Go, go, go. Even though they smashed into them pretty much head on, the members of the 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion's The members of the 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion are enthusiasm incarnate. Weird way to phrase that, but okay. With brisk movements, they promptly establish a bridgehead. From there, they set about taking the main areas of the boat. Though outnumbered, their coordination keeps everyone well covered. Destroy the anti-air gun mounts. Take the next set of points. Gunners, don't let them get any closer. We're taking the second bridge back. Form an assault team around the marine unit. It takes a little while, but they manage to finish setting up their counterattack team consisting chiefly of marines. We may be a battalion, but our strength is our mobility, and that can't be used to its fullest in the closed space of a ship's interior. That is why the marines and marine mages are able to put up a fierce fight inside. Here's the counterattack. Marines! Dump them overboard, get rid of them. But the members of the 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion capture point after point with surprising efficiency. Normally, mages focus on mobile battles and aerial maneuvers, and tend not to be so great at close quarters fighting. The vanguard might be different, but the members in the rear usually have a hard time with it. But training is about eliminating weak points. Show them what the Marines are made of. Don't let those landlubbers think they're so tough. The next group has arrived. I'm sending them in now. And so the 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion and the Marines, each with their own take on close quarters combat, clash and refuse to give any ground. The Marines have a slightly better position, but the situation remains fluid. As both sides struggle to make their next move, the follow-up company lands. We shall be victorious. Major von Debriefing and the company commanders grin. Meanwhile, the Marines, who had been allowed reinforcements to arrive, display their disgrace in their expressions. They are running out of fighting resources to tap into. Sailors would be some help, but they can't be pulled off the cannons. They hesitate slightly, and their actions get delayed. All unoccupied personnel, prepare for hand-to-hand combat. We are going to drive them off this ship. Still, if the bridges, engine block, and magazine get captured, your ship is done for, no matter how much you have left to throw at the enemy. It's that crisis that makes them hesitate a bit before they scrape together what little muscle they can for a counterattack. The captain issues the order to gather up any spare fighting power, and when it comes down to it, a ship has quite a lot of personnel on board. Though it isn't their primary task, sailors can shoot guns. The mobilized officers and petty officers form provisional naval brigades and start to reinforce the Marines. It was all utterly hopeless to begin with. Their idea is to push and push till they push us off the boat. It's quite simple, but it's still a valid attack plan for the narrow confines inside the ship. If this is all, though, the 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion can push them right back. Humming, I cheerfully lay down a smokescreen, and just as the cunning fire from the attacking side has distracted the defenders, all hands, I don't care if they're Marines, teach them what a bad idea it is to mount a frontal attack on my battalion. Remember that the useless ones who die in war get sent to hell. With that shout, she attacks in a flash to bring the fight into close quarters. The pressure of two companies is hitting the resistance hard. Just as the sailors begin to retreat from the mages and their ogre-like game faces, Tanya takes a small unit on a detour. While everyone is focused on the fierce fighting inside the ship, she seizes the opportunity and pardon me. While everyone is focused on the fierce fighting inside the ship, she seizes the opportunity and launches a sneak attack on the port side. We're pincered. Shit. Move some of the crew to the port side. They're all confused, eh? Success. Major von Debriefing got around behind them. Now we destroy them all. Our opponents look ready to run once they've been pincered, but we don't let them. Each company commander works to improve their results. The iron law of war is the hegemony of impact and confusion. Break their composure, disrupt their discipline, and then crush them utterly. Chaos is spreading on the defensive side between the rear attack, pulled off efficiently in loyal accordance with the principles of war, and the intensifying frontal attack, just like we wanted. An intense impact crushes the Marines faster than they can close gaps and rebuild the interception line. We're clear. Us too. Directly after that, Tanya gives each company their own target as she mops up the defenders, who are no longer able to operate in an organized way. Good. First company to the bridge. Follow me. Second and third companies go to the engines. Fourth company to the magazine. Capture your objectives quickly. After eliminating the main enemy resistance force, we need to gain control of the key parts of the ship. The plan is to approach each area in order by sweeping outwardly from captured locations. We manage to maintain speed by going around any pockets of enemy resistance, and the decision to share the burden across the battalion is implemented with high standards. Once the ship side realizes that we've stormed the critical areas, they give up resisting. Discipline has collapsed inside, and the sailors look like they're about to flee. At the same time, their pretend enemy joins up with reinforcements and seems ready for more. The defense's fighting force is already practically non-existent, and their methods of resistance are limited. They are forced to gracefully admit their defeat to the referees. Okay, rush them in your two-man cells. Vanguard troops, brace yourselves. Major von Debriefing, that's enough, that's enough. The message comes just as she's about to step onto the bridge. For the referees, who were forced to follow all those insane maneuvers, the end couldn't have come soon enough. Honestly, so many things had gone through their minds when she told them to come with her because she was going to seize the second bridge. The exercise is over. I say again, the exercise is over. The call ending the game echoes throughout the ship over the loudspeakers. Hearing this, though they are concerned about all the things on the ship that were damaged, everyone is finally able to relax. It had been a rare joint combat simulation. Many things were broken, but there hadn't been any accidents. All right. Stupid corpses, you can move now. All the sailors and marines who were judged dead and ordered to lie still, face down, sluggishly got to their feet. We may have been using exercise-grade rubber bullets and low-power explosion formulas, but that doesn't mean they feel very good. It would have hurt a lot. Some of the injured men even have to go to the infirmary to get treated by a surgeon. For example, take the sailors who were unlucky enough to get caught up in the firefight between the 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion and the Marines. They said that, despite ducking down, they came out of it worse for wear because stray bullets kept hitting them. Although such bad luck was rare, no small number of people were hurt in the melee on the interior of the ship. A team of medics and surgeons was on call and prepared for efficient intake, but I imagine the infirmary will still be crowded for a while. And in the midst of all that hustle and bustle, Major Tanya von Degrichaff is in the war room, which had already been picked up. Although it is small, some thought was put into its design, so the atmosphere remains rather relaxing. It is now packed full of officers. In her hand is a cup of coffee she was given. It is supposedly better than the stuff the army serves. Something smells faintly like baked goods, surely only in the Navy, where they are allowed to bring their own rations and cookies. Can you enjoy that? Naturally, we are not just having a tea party for no reason. After the exercise, it is time for the main event. Very well, let's review the full fleet closed quarter exercise. The seamen have been permitted port and starboard liberty and raced off to the PX, still in a holiday mood, now boosted by post-exercise cheer. But unlike them, the officers' real work begins now. We have to go through the referee's commentary and the reports from each unit commander to find areas of improvement and reflect on what happened, so we can put the lessons to use in actual combat. This time was different from the usual exercise in that it included a boarding scenario that aimed to be extremely realistic. But to only do that would be a waste. First of all, it is still early in the year, but I think we can say that this exercise was meaningful. The all-important ratings showed that the participants thought the exercise was worth doing. The Navy, who provided the base and ship as the venue, are desperate for anti-mage combat experience. They can never get enough of it. Although their main job is counter-ship warfare, they have learned through battle that marine mages simply can't be ignored. But they never have enough marine mages for an exercise, and how few mages they do have allotted internally is a matter of constant contention. Yes, the borderline overworked marine mages are in such great demand that they don't have the wherewithal to participate in war games. And so, thus, the Navy was thrilled to have this joint exercise to gain some of that missing experience. At the same time, Tanya herself and the 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion had little experience with anti-ship combat or battles to capture ships. So the exercise was in their best interest as well. More than anything, it was what the General Staff wanted. They had no choice but to participate. That notwithstanding, it was still a useful experience. And when the referees said it was meaningful, they meant it. When it comes to results, although they were up against particularly elite mages, building some experience handling that situation was clearly valuable for the Navy. Alright. First, some complaints from Captain Gran of the warship used in the exercise, the Basel. Captain Gran stands and bows to Major von Degrichaff. To be blunt, you creamed us. And on top of that, the year has only just started, and we have taken all kinds of damage. His expression is somewhat resigned as he acknowledges his ship's defeat. No one died during the exercise, but that didn't mean the ship wasn't laid to waste. It was more than a few broken windows. The formulas and grenades may have been exercise grade, but they were still hurled all over the place. Naturally, the crew did cleanup as an exercise in damage control, but even still. Damage control went fairly well. The crew was able to make prompt repairs. The results were all right. They could at least be satisfied with them, if nothing else. There were no issues during the operation inspection after interior maintenance was performed, mainly on the engines. That said, although the damage isn't bad enough that the ships need to be docked, there are a number of repairs that need to be made. Broken glass exchanged, dents fixed, and so on. That will take some time. Luckily, it'll be patched up by the time the Entente Alliance ships have to leave the neutral port. But the captain still isn't happy about it. As such, Major von Degrichaff bows as well. Honestly, it might be a bit weird that the child among all these adults is the one being so considerate. It might be weird, but I guess I just have to go with it, since it's better than being seen as uncaring. Our most urgent task is to reevaluate our anti-air fire. I can't believe we didn't even graze the incoming mages. He looks like he wants to rough up the men of his who boasted that they wouldn't let the mages anywhere near the ship. The gunners who upset him are sure to be trained extra hard for some time. Still, everyone is relieved that they learned their lesson in an exercise rather than in actual combat. The observing captains are also sure to tighten up their training regimens in the same way. If things go downhill when the enemy reaches a ship, then they have to drive the enemy off before that happens. Learning that is a great outcome from the exercise. Major von Degrichaff, do you have any suggestions for improvements from the attacking side? I believe the fundamental problem is a lack of firepower. I can't imagine anything but a dense barrage of anti-air fire will prevent an approach. Tanya, who was actually one of the mages to so easily break through their defenses, has an even simpler opinion, the utterly straightforward one that they don't have enough guns. Tanya would tell you that if intercepting is a matter of probability, the only way to raise the probability is to increase the density of anti-air fire. The idea for this comes from the simple knowledge that at the end of their trials and errors, the navies of countries outside this world all went running for the solution of adding more anti-air fire. If they don't outfit ships like porcupines, they'll be vulnerable to an attack from the sky. Plus, Tanya adds in her head, even the aircraft carriers the Americans used near the end of World War II that supposedly had great anti-aircraft fire couldn't completely stop a certain all-in approach taken on the assumption of not returning, namely kamikaze suicide bombing attacks. Basel has some of the most powerful anti-air cannons out of all of our existing ships. To someone who doesn't know yet, charging a ship with a mountain of autocannons seems like suicide. The Navy officer who brought it up, looking confused, seems to have done so because he thought the ship had enough firepower. And it is not such an outlandish thing to believe. It is a practical truth that human beings, while intending to take in things objectively, only accept what they themselves can understand subjectively. In a surprise twist, Lippmann's stereotype paradoxically describes how far the human intellect can expand. A warship with a pile of autocannons is a floating fortress. Among them, Basel boasts outstanding defensive power. So the question arises, isn't that enough? To the officers in attendance, it's a natural question. Or at least to them, it's not a strange one. From the point of view of the attacker, It's not much of a threat, but Tanya puts an end to it easily. To be honest, it really wasn't even an obstacle. That matter-of-fact murmur is significant. She has hinted that anti-air fire is not actually an efficient defense against attacks from the sky. All the Northern Sea Fleet Command, previously lacking in anti-mage combat and exercise experience, can do is register anew what a threat mages truly are. Still, that's just the opinion of one major, and they would like to hear from a third party who participated in the assault. The head referee gathers that and discreetly eyes the referee in charge of the attacking side. The referee takes the hint and begins giving his general opinion. I agree with Major von Degrichaff. I accompanied her on the charge and was surprised to find the firing line not as imposing as would have previously been thought. But, contrary to most of the officer's hopes, he essentially repeats what Tanya said. Overall, I'm forced to say that our current anti-air fire is about as useful as a bunch of firecrackers. Our defensive firepower is that weak? The claim is that they have been overestimating their defense, and in response, the officers ask a question that shows their consternation. Is it really, honestly and truly that weak? Yes, we are lacking even more than I had ever expected. In order to halt approaches, we need to increase the number of guns until the ships are like porcupines. The result from the second referee is simple and leaves no room for misunderstanding. I agree, and we should be adding not just 20mm autocannons, but 40mm as well. Tanya concurs more strongly than anyone else present. She believes the American military provided the best example of ideal anti-air fire. In this world, it is completely unheard of, but it has already been proven in combat. She indirectly proposes the innovation as her own contribution, albeit dispassionately. What do you mean? This is just my opinion, but 20mm are for short-range defense. In order to create a multi-layered interception shield, I strongly recommend adding mid-range guns, Tanya answers. From what she can tell, the 20mm guns have the advantage when it comes to handling and speed, but in terms of range and firepower, they are far weaker. It is logical to add 40mm autocannons for intercepting at mid-range. Most importantly, mage defensive shells and aircraft have no chance of withstanding a 40mm shell. From the attacking point of view, capturing a warship with multi-barreled gun emplacements all over it, like a porcupine, would be a difficult task. If possible, I'd like to focus on numbers. We probably need 10 times the current amount. Captain Gran, what do you think? It is an interesting suggestion, but we can't change the number of cannons without doing major overhauls, such as removing the secondary guns on the flanks. To go a step further, I would say that secondary guns are worse than useless under the circumstances. We need to increase the priority of air defense. Tanya knows it is disrespectful, but she sees a chance for the Navy to take a decisive step forward and chimes in. After all, she knows the era of aerial warfare better than anyone here. She's sure the time will come when warships will be assigned to aircraft carriers as direct support. Really, she would like to urge them to change the doctrine from obsessing about big ships with big guns to focusing on their air force as much as their main power. Incidentally, she is also a believer in fire action and values warship cannons for their supporting fire. With that said, even one-shot lighters were able to send the then state-of-the-art Prince of Wales and the Repulse, which had been reconstructed for the modern era, to join the Seaweed. Of course, we should concentrate on removing the secondary guns already there and increasing the amount of high-angle guns and other autocannon emplacements. She also knows that until a comparable incident occurs, it will be difficult to convince the ship warfare-oriented Navy to accept an Air Force-centric doctrine. At the same time, the fleet's original mission was set as counter-ship combat, and the use of mages was not yet so widespread. I have heard that requests for vessels to be upgraded for anti-mage and anti-air combat began pouring in this year as a countermeasure. Honestly, everyone still thinks mages fight on land. Computation orb functionality and aircraft specs are both improving rapidly. As a result, the idea that maybe orbs and planes might be threats is only just starting to spread. Only someone who understands the history of how aviation advanced by leaps and bounds during the Second World War can hope to understand. Until then, no one had dreamed war would drive scientific and technological advances in the manner that it does. It's not that we're taking air defense lightly, but we'll have to think about it if issues arise fighting off other ships. In truth, even officers who are far from inept have deeply rooted views. Ships are equipped to counter ships because the Navy can't escape the instinct to keep their original counter-ship combat mission in mind. And thinking in terms of counter-ship doctrine, they'd like to keep their secondary guns. Though the importance of being equipped for close-quarters fighting has lessened, the need to fight off torpedo boats and destroyers, which do press in to attack, is a factor that can't be ignored to them. We'll have to discuss it with technology. Please let Navy Command and the Technology Department handle this issue. In the end, the conclusion is not to reject the idea, but take it under advisement, which essentially means to shelve it. Well, in a way, by saying her piece, Tanya has done her duty. After all, it's no skin off her back if the anti-air fire isn't strengthened. As long as it's not a ship I'm on, where it sinks has nothing to do with me. Besides, the Empire is a continental state, not a maritime state. Without breathing a word of any of that, she camouflages herself with a sober attitude, but she is in utter earnest. The best thing for ensuring my own survival is training my troops. That's all I can do, in truth. Of course, she is passionate about identifying issues in this post-mortem. Well, she has to be. She believes that preventing mistakes is the best course of action. All right. Are there any other remarks from the attacking side? I would say there are cooperation problems. Of what sort? The Marines and sailors don't seem to be very well coordinated. I felt like the disorder of the sailors was tripping up the Marines. She had noticed it on her approach. The deck was a real mess. Her impression was that the two different corps had trouble working together. If they had been units stationed there today, below par coordination would be understandable. But for units that are shipmates for a matter of months or even years, it is a bit problematic. From what I could tell, it seemed like the Marines felt their job consisted of ground and landing battles. Of course, I can't deny that those are their primary duties, but we don't want them to suck at fighting on board a ship. And the confusion and failure to cooperate with sailors is completely unacceptable. In an organization where sales and systems engineering becomes estranged, they have to compensate with a death march. In the military, the death in death march is literal. Considering that I could end up a casualty of poor cooperation between our own troops, it is absolutely critical to suggest an improvement. Having reached this quite reasonable conclusion, albeit via a selfish argument, Tanya speaks eloquently on the necessity of increased coordination. Her idea at its root is self-preservation, but at the same time, she is altruistic. It can't be said that she isn't acting with the aim to benefit the majority. It's just simply a matter of the fact that, in this case, the will of the majority coincides with her own. Probably everyone was vaguely aware of the poor cooperation. The head referee questions the concerned party. Naturally, he does it in a way that is sensitive to their sense of honor. I see. What do the Marines think of this? I am embarrassed to admit that we haven't trained much with fighting on ships in mind. I acknowledge the need for retraining. In response to the comment from the Marines, Tanya declares her unit's need for more training as well. After having actually fought inside a ship, I think my unit is lacking experience too. She is half using inadequate training as an excuse. Though the 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion is elite, the group is made up entirely of mages, and their lack of knowledge of other fields is a real problem. That is why Tanya hopes to do more joint training with the Marines, who have the most experience on this front. You can't hesitate to borrow wisdom from experts if you want to stay alive. The plan for what happens next can come after you survive. If this meeting runs long enough, the Navy will feed us dinner. That is, the good food that Navy officers get. It is no problem at all if the exercise schedules take more time than planned. In this way, Tanya continues her hard work, cultivating a heartening friendship with the Navy while keeping an eye out on her next battlefield, though it runs against her own thinking, and thus she takes one step after another towards victory. And thus ends Chapter 4. Chapter 5, The Devil of the Rhine, shall be read next week. This is on page 226 of the text. Thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful evening. All voices and animations were created by myself, namely Daniel Howard Hurt. The original story credit goes to Carlo Zen, and the original light novel art was created by Shinobu Shinotsuki. Thank you for joining us. Auf Wiedersehen.